or shall I? Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. Tonight we're going to be starting in on Wheelers by Matt Stevens. Uh, this is a much newer book than we normally wind up reading here on Paper Cuts, because this is coming to us by author permission. I read the short story this book was initially based on, also written by Matt Stevens, called Miles Past Xanadu. And I absolutely fell in love with it, and I went, oh, what's the genre of this? And went digging around. Turns out it was something called solarpunk, and I absolutely fell in love with the genre, and I've just been uh, head over heels excited about this, getting to read this book in particular, and I really just have not been able to wait to give this a read. Uh, many thanks to Matt Stevens for the permission to read this. Uh, this book is I don't know. So the short story this is based on, Miles Past Xanadu, is the first thing that I read that was anything resembling solarpunk, and I immediately just like my eyes lit up, and it was so good that I had to like dig around in the author's blog, like, what has this guy written anything else? And yes, he's written a good deal of other things, not the least of which being uh this book, Wheelers. Gariki has very helpfully pasted the Wikipedia link for solarpunk. So let me explain solarpunk in a nutshell. Essentially, you know how when someone says, "Oh, that's cyberpunk," because it's looking to a far-flung future where, the climate has completely ruined the world and corporations own every iota of everything, and it's just the worst and it's horrible. But people have really interesting technology. I think uh, knock something over. I think a description I've heard of cyberpunk is high tech, low life. Uh, and so by that same token, solarpunk is instead green tech, high life. Essentially, solarpunk is kind of the opposite of cyberpunk. It looks at all the technology we have and looks at the effect we've had on the world and goes, okay, so what happens to cause a world to be better in the future, to be, if not broadly better, perhaps even its best in the future. And so it relies very heavily on like the concept of a pleasant future, which is really a nice change of pace. You see a lot of the rise of the dystopia has been very strong, especially if you think about in more recent years how popular certain dystopia have become. So this is really a breath of fresh air. And another thing I really love about solarpunk is it's very early in its life as a genre. It really started to come together in the late 2000s, really gaining steam in the 2010s into now. And so it's early on enough as a punk suffix genre that it still has some teeth. It hasn't aged far enough that you read it and go, "Oh, that was probably daring at the time, but not a big deal now." No, it's still kind of a big deal because it's all right encapsulated right now. And unsurprisingly, I like anything where we're going to be, improving the health and safety of our planet. Especially this. A lot of these stories focus on. Oh, we've added a command. Uh, yeah, in a nutshell, science fiction, literary. Yeah, Gariki has added a command to explain solarpunk in a slightly smaller nutshell than I've been putting it in. If you want to put it in a very small nutshell, it tends to be potentially utopian fiction focusing on the improvement of the planet and the world around us through community and technology. That's probably the tightest nutshell I can put it in that doesn't glaze over something. Uh, you know what? I could carry on for just an incredible volume of time talking about how much I like solarpunk and what I've been really finding refreshing about it. But I think we should just dive into the book, and I think you all will see what I'm rattling on about. Let's get started with Wheeler's immediately reading the foreword. Dr. Robert H. Goddard is quoted as saying, "The dream of yesterday is the hope of today and the reality of tomorrow. The dreams of yesterday have turned out worse than planned by most. My father's generation thought by 2021 we'd have flying cars and colonies on the moon. The current view of the future is almost uniformly dystopian, especially in matters of the environment. In writing this story, the hardest part was the plot, because the world building came so easily in comparison. I knew where I wanted the world to go. Starting my protagonist Dana in a place that was the exact opposite of the world I was building seemed the natural way to compare and contrast. Solarpunk is a relatively new genre that emerged as a response to people who don't realize they're making a dark, terrible future into a self-fulfilling prophecy. Solarpunk is hopeful, sympathetic, and deals with real-world problems in the best possible way. The principles of solarpunk are of great appeal. A world where creativity is encouraged over mass production, where resources are shared and decentralized rather than locked up tight, and where high-tech and low-tech work side by side cooperatively, with an emphasis on restoring the climate and ecology to full health. What drew me to solarpunk was that it never made politics the solution, nor money, nor military force. Indeed, these things are rarely mentioned in any solarpunk story I've read. This novel isn't meant to be a plan for the future. Technology is involved, but almost all the pivotal equipment is already available, if not widespread. This was a deliberate choice. I put particular emphasis on the idea that the tools we need are out there right now. In sci-fi, there's a long history of life imitating art. For that reason, the world we imagine is a very important step. If I can make a future that's hopeful and a world that's focused on making things better seem realistic to my readers, then the stories of Arcadia will have served their purpose. So, little context. The series title for Wheelers, it takes place in a series called Stories of Arcadia. That's what's being mentioned there. Again, I'm resisting the urge to carry on because I know if I start talking about how much I love this genre, we will never get to the book. I've been reading a lot of this lately, uh, and I could really digress for a long time, but let's stay on topic. Yeah, we have the means and the desire, but lack the drive. Yeah, that's definitely something that comes up. That's something that a lot of broader solar punk literature that I've been reading kind of tries to address. It's like, okay, what could we do to produce the drive in people? What could we do to get people to improve their community and their climate? Anyway, I could carry on. Chapter 1. Dana carefully licked the packet clean before she unlocked her booth. She was careful to show the clear plastic, making it visible to everyone. Even a smear of food on the paper was enough to get the beggars outside watching. She left the booth, and the next customer in line was holding a tray with 2 wrapped packets. 2 packets, she observed. Hey, big spender. The customer took her booth and locked it quickly, enjoying his meal. Despite herself, Dana glanced at the packets. Apple slices, no core or skin, bread slices with some kind of spread for flavor. There was a protein pack where most of the nourishment was, but that was cheap. The fact that he had any kind of fruit meant he had some money. Wonder why he's eating here. Dana's next stop was the bank. 3 blocks of travel during the pre-dawn work shift. The crowd usually moved clockwise through the city at that time of day, and Dana let the crush of people take her along in the direction she needed to go. The bank had not been encouraging, but by then she was running late for work, and being late was a costly infringement. Guys, do we have to tussle? Huh? Can't you just let Dad read? Come here. Clearly you have invaded, so you get help. Hi. You instigated there. I saw you throw the first pawn. He's like, please put me down. Please, please, please put me down. I know. I'm so mean to you. Pick you up. Hold you. Oh, so rude. Costly infringement. That's where we were. Running to the monorail, she made another call, which went to voicemail. Micah, I've been trying to reach you all morning. You're my accountant. Shouldn't you be ready to take my money at a moment's notice? Get back to me when you hear this. I have to turn over my device before I get to work, but I need to talk to you. The rate of homelessness is up to 35%, while the luxury apartment buildings built for the wealthy are being left empty. There's nobody left can afford their price. There are people starving at the base of the luxury skyscrapers. Nobody's starving. The food rations are the same as they've been for 30 years. They're counting out those rations by the calorie. Could you live on the caloric count they give the unemployed now? Well, you know what? Maybe I should try it. You know how amazing I look. I'd be so skinny. Maybe I should go on their diet for a while. It's not a fad diet, it's starvation. And I'm saying maybe they should be more focused on that than they are on making those signs and tying up the traffic. The monorail was the best part of her day. The packing plan allowed transport fees to be charged to the company for 1 hour per day. Some of the other workers hurried to run errands. If they could get to the plant before the hour was up, they'd have their public transport fees taken care of. Dana never dared. It was far easier to get in ahead of the crowd and get the copyright checks out of the way. But for 10 minutes every morning, Dana was able to squeeze herself next to the window and pretend she was flying. As long as she was by the window, the press of people was second in her mind, with a whole open world ahead of her eyes. And for 3 of those 10 minutes, she could see the towers. Under the domes of the top 20 floors, a whole forest was growing, with big leafy trees and winding vines covered in multicolored wildflowers. Dana only got to see the myriad of colorful things from a distance as the monorail passed between tunnels, but they were always soothing to her soul. She'd likely never get to see them up close, unless she could afford a day pass to take a tour of the tree gardens, but for 3 minutes a day, she could see them for free. Nice, isn't it? A stooped old man said to her, plainly envious. Lights out all night, weatherproofing all year round. Must be amazing. He looked out the window, peering to catch the last glimpses of the towers as the tunnel swept them out of sight. One day I'll get there. Dana said nothing, but her peace faltered a bit. This guy was old enough to be near retirement and recall age. If he was still riding the monorails, well, he wasn't going to know anything different at this point. Sentenced 40 years for conspiracy to disrupt worker hours. More on this story after these messages. Work is its own reward. Corporate contribution feeds millions each day. Don't let the leeches steal food from your children. Report those who don't volunteer. Additional bonuses apply for turning in family members. The slogans played everywhere, enough that they were white noise to her by now. The checks at the plant were routine. Dana turned in her device, like any electronic gizmos that might carry a recording function. The hardened room set off a charge to fry anything with a circuit or chip, just in case she tried to smuggle anything in. She was searched carefully to make sure she was carrying no tools to make notes. Privately, Dana always thought it was a little too invasive. The packing plant used claimed ideas, but it wasn't like drawing a diagram with anything was worth much, even to their competitors. It could be worse, she told herself. Claimed ideas are the backbone of industry, and this plant only uses 1 or 2. High-paying jobs, you gotta get there an hour earlier just to get through all the copyright checks. After 10 hours of cutting packing material into shapes and securing boxes full of everything from stuffed toys to replacement parts to furniture, Dana finally clocked off. Dana made it home, almost limping with her exhaustion, and found that her stomach had dropped into her shoes. Her front door had an infringement notice nailed to it. Failure to pay utility fees, this property has been given a Class 4 infringement notice. There was a number to call, but Dana knew it wouldn't help. There was a car parked on the corner, watching for her to go in. She tried to go back inside and reclaim any personal effects, or even sleep on her back step. It'd be another fee she couldn't afford. The fringers worked on commission, being paid a percentage of all the notices they handed out. They'd take any excuse. It was well after dark when she finally made her way to Micah's place. When she found that it was sealed up too, it suddenly made sense. Her accountant had gone bust. She couldn't call? Dana considered her options. It was punishable by fine to reside anywhere without a permit or at least a utility certificate. The law had been changed early in the year to list residents as sleeping in any kind of temporary dwelling, including a dumpster or under a bench somewhere. The homeless people couldn't afford much, but the fine for illegally squatting was low enough that even they'd be expected to pay it, and have to move on quickly. So the shelters were her only option. The city by night was lit up, of course. Drones patrolled the skies constantly, keeping order. The only thing above the drones were the towers in A sector. They'd only seen stars in movies, which she hadn't been able to afford in quite a while. In fact, as she gazed up, she couldn't remember the last time she'd seen a bird or an aircraft, even. Such things weren't really around anymore. The drones were the roof of her world, and there was nothing above them. At least until tonight. Dana wasn't sure what she was seeing. At that hour, there were fewer people on the streets, but they all noticed it too. It looked like a large, colorful balloon floating over the city streets, dangling a canister of some kind. It was hard to make out at a distance, but the canister was patchwork metal. Dana found herself dissecting it with her eyes. Everything in the city was mass-produced. Metalwork was expensive. It had to be done by licensed workers. As a result, improvised construction was visible here and there, but never anything homemade. To build something yourself was to leave permanent evidence for the fringers to see. The balloon was floating over the city and had a flashing LED light on the base, making it obvious to the city street that something was floating down to them. Then the fringer drones started shooting at it. The balloon caught fire instantly, and the package dropped, out of sight, somewhere on the next street. The drones gave chase. There was a vague sound of something crashing and a few more shots being fired. Dana looked around the street. Almost everyone else had already forgotten it, going back to their schedules. Nobody had time to pause and gawk. She was already walking too. Whatever was going on had nothing to do with her. She knew the shelters were as bad as she'd heard the second she saw it. There were people trying to sleep on the stairs out front, more people on the fire escape. The building itself would be full to bursting. She walked in slowly and tapped her ID at the terminal, wanting a shower just looking at the cracked, smeared screen. The shelter registered that she was a resident there now, and told her to find a bunk. Of course, there were 3 people for every bed. Some of them were sharing, willingly or not. The heat and smell inside was suffocating. It seemed almost inevitable when she saw Micah there already. Her accountant, also her lifelong friend, looked as small and scared as Dana felt. In fact, it was almost the uniform here. They tried to talk, having to constantly shift or apologize as 100 people pushed past them on the way to somewhere else. "You don't have any friends you can stay with?" Dana shook her head. "My friends have to follow the rules about house guests on their own lease. Landlords can't accept squatters without charging them rent, and apparently the law was just changed to include a friend on the sofa as a squatter. Yeah." Micah nodded, gesturing around. "How well I know it. I was just busted letting a friend stay with me. Class 2 infringement meant I couldn't hold my license anymore. Fringers shut down my home office, and here we are," Dana said meekly. She could feel the smell of 100 other people sticking to her, and she ducked her head further, trying to crawl into herself for lack of a better hiding place. "I really thought I was ahead of the fees." "Yeah, they change the rates all the time without announcing them. Look, I've been here before," Micah said with forced cheer. "When you're homeless, you can still work. You don't have to worry about utility fees. 6 months from now, someone else with a room will go bust, and there'll be a place for you. Since you'll have some savings again." "That's my accountant's economic plan. Homeless person with a full-time job has less overhead, and tragedies happen to other people all the time." Micah had the same look Dana saw in the mirror every day. "What's the alternative?" The eternal question, isn't it? Dana and Micah both turned to see someone was apparently leaving the shelter with a small shoulder bag. Dana took a few moments to recognize him. It was the big spender from the diner. He can afford fruit, but he lives in a shelter? The man gestured the 2 women to his bunk. "It's all yours. You're friends. You feel pretty safe about sharing." He slung his shoulder bag, smiling broadly. "Me, I'm getting out of here at last. City's got only one way, means you're only given one option." His eyes seemed to drill into Dana like he could see through her and the whole world beside. What if, just maybe, there's another way? Dana and Micah stared at him, not knowing what to make of this intensity. I saw you at the diner. You were buying luxury items. I just wanted to know what they were like for my last meal. The man glanced around and forcibly shook Dana's hand. Pleased to meet you. I must be going. He released Dana's hand and swept away from them like he was walking on water. Dana looked down at her hand. His handshake had been a cover to give her something. Magnus Redbone. She read the name off his ration card. He's given us his rations. That's suicide, Micah whispered profoundly, looking after Magnus. He's done with the world, making a bold gesture on his way out. They closed 18th Street last week. There were so many jumpers. And he's right. We aren't given any options at this point. It's this or we head for 18th Street ourselves. See, I had a feeling this section of the story was going to be expanded on. Don't worry, gang. This is the cyberpunk future. As the foreword alludes, we're gonna eventually get out of here, and it'll get much more fun. She called her brother. It was his family home too, so he deserved to know it was being seized. Her brother had given up his phone when he left the city, but he'd left her an email address. She'd used it a few times, and within minutes her phone would be ringing, the return contact details blocked. What are they telling you? Her brother asked as she filled him in. That I can take comfort from the knowledge that recruitment services are running at full capacity every day, providing people with top-notch benefits and employment incentives. Usual double talk. Give you anything useful? Dean asked plainly, not even surprised. No, but Micah did have one idea. Her thought was to timeshare the place. I still own it, but the utilities, ration debts, food debts, water, power, house itself is paid off, but it's illegal to ignore utility bills. It'll be seized permanently if I can't find a way. Silence on the other end of the phone. I can't afford to live in my own home. It's my mom's place. We've had it for 7 generations, and I can't stay there. Her voice was blatantly shamed. 7 generations, and she was the one that had failed. She alone had failed, where everyone before her had succeeded. 100 years ago, they would have just cut your water and power and left you alone. 100 years ago, they didn't have 100 people ready to take my house and pay the fees. My house is worth more than I am. If I timeshare the place out, I can have other tenants pay off the debts. Sure, because if people live on the streets for a year, they can keep their utility rations and live in a house for... Dean, sorry. Her brother sighed and returned to the point. You want to take on the homeless as boarders. That's risky, given that you want to have a lot of say in who they are. Yeah, that's the scary part, actually. I've been looking at timeshare sites. You get a much higher percentage if the house is unoccupied. She took a shuddering breath. I've been doing the math, and if I move out completely, I can pack in more lodgers. Families instead of individuals. I can be debt-free and above water again in about 11 months. If I try to stay and share my house, it will take 4 years. I'm concerned less about the money and more about the risk you're taking with your personal safety. Listen, one of our people just traded up. We usually strip their rig for parts, but she happened to owe me a favor, and... I'm not moving into a rig! You'll be moving into mine if you can't find a place fast. Why not get one of your own? I'll talk to you later, Dean. Dana disconnected the call. It was the way the conversation always ended, but this time she knew she was going to lose, eventually. It was an open secret the city could find cheap labor at the shelters. Most of them had been there long enough that they'd work for rations. Micah had counseled her not to tell anyone she had a home waiting for her when she got out from under her debts. Very few of the others could say the same. Which meant that Dana had to blend in with them. When a work party was called, she was the first to volunteer. If it got her away from the shelter smell, well, so much the better. The humidity was killer, but work parties got water utilities as part of their payment. It was almost the only payment they got. Dana groaned after the first hour. I'd kill for a good breeze right now. The foreman overheard her and cracked a laugh. City's designed to make sure we never hear the wind blow. If you feel that's unfair, come back to this spot sometime. He gestured up at the Storm Memorial. It wasn't that huge when compared to the other buildings around it. The memorial was a wall that stood almost 10 meters tall and had wings extended outward from its windward side like an unfinished triangle. The memorial had names written in small lettering, carved directly into the concrete. How'd they ever get so much concrete for this? Well, this was before the rationing got tight. It's why we need constant maintenance for it. We'd never be able to replace it if it came to that. His device chimed insistently and he sighed. Back to work. We've been sitting still too long. The work continued for another couple hours. Her team checked the wear on the concrete monument, examining some of the names to see if the details were fading. Some of them had been vandalized and excuse me. Some of them had been vandalized and needed to be recarved. Dana noticed a splash of color. It was the first color she'd seen all day. Even the sky was a washed-out gray, and yet here, through a tiny crack in the concrete, a weed was growing, with a bright yellow dandelion crowning the only bit of greenery in sight. One of the other workers noticed her scrutiny and called over the foreman, who cussed violently when he saw it. Oh, great, this is going to cost me a fortune. It's a weed. It's a weed growing through concrete. The foreman sounded exhausted just from the existence of the plant. We can't just yank it out. The roots are all underneath. We gotta pry up the section and kill the roots, or it'll just keep pushing. Things already reached daylight. If it's made any kind of gap in the concrete, it'll just funnel down any light and moisture to the roots. The point with this just keeps rolling. Dana looked back at the concrete and the flower. She hadn't seen one in a long time. One of the men from the shelter saw the flower and snatched it up. He plucked the dandelion and ate it. Dana's eyes were glued to the splash of green and yellow all the way into his mouth, and she felt oddly sick to see it go. I've always found dandelions to be a little too bitter for my taste, but if you're hungry. Anyway, the foreman had already pulled out his comm and was talking to someone on the other end, reporting the damage. It's gonna need another section, seam to seam in the concrete. He listened for a moment. I know there's a waiting list, but the roots are already pushing hard. We wait another month and we'll need 2 concrete pavers. I know there's a shortage. What do you want from me? I can't replace it with anything else. The concrete can't block. Yeah, I'll do what I can. Dana let out her breath and found she was looking up the memorial. There were a terrifying number of names. Lost to the storm that came and went before my time. The foreman finished his call. All right, I'll get the weed killer. Was shut down in less than 4 hours, but the low power function meant that it wasn't detected by any of the standard defenses. Made it all the way to K sector before it was detected by police drones. The fact that it got into the city at all was a bad sign. Well, I agree, but it was a balloon. Floated over the walls and got shot down. The reason it went unnoticed was because it was harmless. Our defenses are meant to watch for threats. It wasn't random. Those freaks out in the wasteland launched a craft that got into the city. They'd eat us if they could. Well, if there's a chance that there's a probe for a larger attack, well... And Dana scowled at the TV. She knew at least half of the reports were exaggerated, if not outright lies. Nobody ever called them on it because nobody who watched the news had ever been outside the city, herself included. The shelter fed their tenants only sparingly. Dana still had work, which meant she could afford food rations, but plenty of others weren't so lucky, so Dana made a point of not lining up with them. She looked for Micah and found her in a corner, speaking desperately into her device. Sweetie, I know it's pretty, but it's a waste, she was saying with a firm mom voice. When you get a little older, you'll realize that smart people don't waste what they have on things like that. She listened and looked sad. Sweetie, I know. I'm sure it's very beautiful, and so are you. But that means we gotta take care of you first. Put your father back on. Dana retreated. There was no room for privacy, but she had to at least pretend. Dana went out through the alley behind the shelter. It was barely wide enough for the rubbish bins, which were always picked clean. Food was never thrown away. Assorted debris could be salvaged as long as nobody was caught, since scavenging was an unlicensed source of goods. The alley had police tape cordoning off an area about 6 feet long. Dana pointedly turned away from it. She took a deep breath, not even noticing the smell. The shelter was worse than an alley for air movement. Dana shut her eyes and spread her arms out as wide as she could reach. She felt nothing. Standing lengthwise in the alley, she could reach out without hitting the walls. She took one step, and her hand was flat against the wall. She took a step the other way, and her other hand hit the opposite wall. She returned to the open space in between. With her eyes shut, she could have been standing in the middle of a wide-open field or on top of a tower, miles from anything. It was soothing, meditative. When Dana opened her eyes, Micah was right in front of her. She'd probably been standing there for a few moments, letting Dana finish. She was hardly the only one who liked to pretend they had space. My kid found someone in school willing to sell a crayon. Bright purple. That's a color he won't see anywhere else. I don't know where it came from, but whoever has it is smart enough not to let it go cheap. The balloon came to mind then. It was colorful before it was shot down. Dana nodded sickly. I found a weed today. There was a little yellow flower on it. I couldn't stop staring at it. I hadn't seen a color that cheerful, maybe not for months. Not in here, anyway. I might have another option, Micah said quietly, and she came closer to Dana, revealing a set of identification papers with Micah's picture and someone else's name. Fear of being noticed with the false papers was the only reason Dana didn't shriek when she realized what she was looking at. She hissed in her friend's ear. You got fakes? You have any idea what'll happen to you if you're caught with those? I know what'll happen to me if I don't have them, Micah said tightly, setting a quick glance over the police tape. Her name was Nikki. She'd been in the shelter for 5 weeks. I'm not ending up like that. So you took her ID and got creative? And that guy Magnus's ration card. I can do it for you. You could apply to be a tenant in your own place. Would the Fringers even notice? Yes. Yes, we would. A voice said coldly from down the alleyway. The figure emerged out of the dark. His uniform was immediately recognizable. Micah squeaked in panic, her hands dropping to her sides instantly. She was trying to hide the ID, but really she was drawing attention to it. Dana almost relaxed. Evening, Eli. Micah looked at her askance. You know him? Dana nodded, unconcerned. Eli's eyes never left Dana, but he spoke to Micah. You can run away now, miss. I won't ask for your name this time, fake or real. Thank you. Micah turned on her heel and went back inside. That was nice of you, Dana said once they were alone. You're all right for a trainee fringer. She almost didn't say the next part. Your captain would have arrested her. I hope they never beat the humanity out of you, Eli. Eli scoffed. I heard your place was locked down. Can you make the rates? No, I have to rent it out to pay off my utilities. She gestured at the police tape. Where is everyone? There's a body in the street. Shouldn't there be, like, a crime scene, lawmen, coroners, something? I'm all they need. Busy night for jumpers over in Gold Sector. Almost an even dozen. You mean the suicides? Dana couldn't help but glance back at the tape. What happened to Nikki? What always happens to people who fall through the cracks. When you're here a month, your odds change dramatically. You stay longer than 3 weeks, you're just rolling the dice with your life. Dana winced hard. The shelter's my home for at least a year while the debts are clear. Eli looked sick. There's nobody you could stay with me? It came out as a question, but Dana knew what he was offering. Nobody investigates Fringers' homes, not even the trainees. I stay with the division for another 3 years before my first tour is over. Dana looked back at the police tape. Actually, I might have another option. Is he going to cancel me? Micah asked quietly as Dana came back inside. Dana shook her head. Dinner was over, and the people were crowding around them again, making their way to wherever they found a free spot. He offered to put me up himself. You gonna do it? I like Eli. He's a friend, but... Dana let out a breath between her teeth slowly. If I go with him, I'm at his mercy for a year, and I don't think he's a bad guy in any way, but I know what he'd prefer it to mean when he says I can stay with him. Well, plenty of people live that way, happily. You're taking a very real chance with your life if you say no, Micah said seriously, patting the pocket with the fake ID. I know the chance I'm taking with this. You think I'm going to take that risk for fun? No, Dana admitted. We don't exactly have a lot of options, do we? Dana was chewing on her lips so hard she tasted blood. I might have one more option. I can stay with my brother. Didn't know you had a brother. I don't talk about him. Dana hesitated for just a moment. Micah had taken a chance by being honest with her. He went feral 6 years ago. You're talking about out past the red line? Are you insane? She pointed back at the screen, still showing the news. There's nothing out there! Even if you could find your brother, who's to say he won't eat you? The only ones that survive out there are the cannibals. Even the news says so. Dana swallowed the first response that came to mind. I never believed that, and even if I did, I'm no safer here. We both know it. We're both about to break the law. Obeying it means we're going to starve if we're lucky. Micah had no answer to that. I can get you an ID. I can get my name back in a year. You can get your house back by then. Dana bit her lip. See if you can get tenancy in my house. I'd be glad to have a friend use it rather than randomly assign strangers. If you applied now, we could get shared residence status around the time I get back. Michael winced and gave her a tight hug. Be careful. Eli gave her a ride when she left the shelter with nothing but the clothes on her back. Dana knew he wouldn't be doing it for anyone else. Dana gave one last look at the shelter. She could still feel the press of bodies crawling into her pores. Eli drove her as far as the turbines, gathering power from the edge of the city, the only structure on the outer rim that rose above the windbreaks. Look, Dana, I'm a cop, but don't let that fool you. I've got a pulse and everything. If you run out there, past the red line, there's nothing. As in capital N nothing, capital A at all. Nobody comes back from that. I can't afford to live here, Eli, she said seriously. She gestured over her shoulder back the way she came. Those expenses don't stop when I'm in a shelter, you know. You might get things like soap through your employment benefits, but I work a factory packing line. I barely qualify for toilet paper rights. Dana, you won't survive out there. If there's such a thing as post-apocalyptic, it's the nothing. Most people in the shelters never get out from under the interest on their debts. You only have to stick it out for a year. 1 year. The city's not paradise, but at least there aren't cannibals. Dana set her jaw. He was the second person to quote the news, and her brother had promised it wasn't even remotely true. I never believed that story, she said quietly, hoping her brother was telling her the truth. She was betting her life on it. Her device beeped and she checked the message. Meet at the city limits. Dana sighed and put her device away. Look, Eli, I know you worry, and I know why, but I trust my chances out there more than my chances in the shelters. She didn't tell him why. Eli gave her a sick look. Is it really such a terrible offer to just stay with me? I wouldn't pressure you into anything for it, Dana. I know you must surely think I will, but I just want you to be safe. Dana softened and leaned over to kiss his cheek. I'll be okay. Wait a minute. Why are we slowing down? Eli looked sick. I'm sorry, Dana, but your name was flagged. At the edge of town, Eli pulled his car to a halt. There was no sign of anyone. The edge of the city only had drones, and even they were out of sight. A spike of fear went through her as she stepped out. Unobserved. What's going to happen? Another vehicle came driving up. Unmarked, only the driver inside. The man who stepped out was older. She'd seen him on television once or twice, so she knew he wasn't a regular lawman. Dana felt her heart rate tick up automatically. Being noticed by power was never a good thing. Who are you? My name is Killian Crawley. I'm the regional commander and chief investigator for the Intellectual Property Infringement Corps. He said it formally before spelling it out. TIPIC. I'm commander of the Fringers, as you people call us. It's arguably the most powerful arm of law enforcement in the world nowadays. And I've known your name for several years. Dana felt a thrill of horror go through her, even as she glared at a lie. Why? Crawley actually smiled. Well, I know how the reputation we have, but in truth, very little of our work is handing out those little red slips. That's just working stiffs like your friend Eli here, trying to make their quotas. Our real work is in actual investigations of theft and piracy. In the city, it's fairly easy to keep on top of it, but outside the limits we have almost no presence, and as a result, the wasteland beyond the red line is almost lawless. Dana said nothing, feeling sweat creep up her spine. Now, as a simple matter of course, we keep aware of people who are connected to the ferals out there. What they do outside our city is relatively harmless, until they try to get a foothold in the city for their criminal activities. You saw that balloon yesterday? Dana froze. That was from outside the city? And you contacted your brother soon after. We wondered if you two were collaborating. I have no idea where my brother's been living out there. The news says it's full of cannibals, but I know that's not true. Crawley held both hands up. Fear not, Miss Harper. We know you're not a criminal. The seizure of your family home is within my authority. I do sympathize that life got ahead of you on points, but... And to that matter, we don't believe you're a dishonest person at all. But your time out there with your brother does present an opportunity. Crawley presented her with a radio. Wherever you end up out there, this radio will let someone find you and send help to bring you back. Dana stared at it. She didn't want to take it. She felt like there was a hit coming. Something really bad. He was being very polite about taking her home away, but he could crush her like a bug. He could crush her brother just as easily if he was anywhere in reach. And he was meeting her at the city limits any second. Crawley surely knows that. Obviously, I don't want you to do anything immoral or illegal. We're a justice department, and we both know this town doesn't look kindly on infringements, but there's precedent for bounty work. Consider this that. A bounty on my brother? Your brother isn't the issue, but we don't care about him. What we care about is the idea that there could be an organized syndicate out there looking to make inroads into our city. So all you have to do is keep your eyes open. Look for signs of conspiracy. We both know the kinds of life people lives out there, trying to keep ahead of starvation, scrabbling for shelter. If there's any sign of people trying to take action that could dig its way into our life here, we need some warning. We need to be ready. He pushed the radio at her. Let us know where they settle. Warn us if they're planning any actions against us. If they can get a weather balloon over the walls without us being able to see where it came from, well... What was that anyway? I did see it, but the drone shot it down. What was the canister? Well, it was empty. Could have carried anything, from a narcotics shipment to a viral agent. We believe it was testing our boundaries. Our drones knocked it down when it reached K sector, but there was no signal to home in on, no engines to pick up. It could have been devastating. Now they know that. You think the Ferals are planning to attack the city? We think they can, and that's all that matters. Crawley gestured at Eli. Take this, Eli said quietly, pushing a shoulder bag at her. She opened and froze. The bag was full of sealed ration packs, just like the one she ate at dinner before work. Or she ate at the diner before work. My God, was it really only the day before yesterday? She looked under the packs and found a fold-up camping cot, wide enough for one person to sleep on without having to lay on the ground, and a space blanket sleeping bag. She couldn't refuse the gear without admitting she was being met at the windbreaks directly. If you can't find anyone, that'll keep you going for a week. And of course, if you do find what we're looking for, it'd only be right if we responded with a gesture of gravity. Or a gesture of gratitude, rather. Dana froze. He could give me my house back. If I don't find anything? Now how could I trust a failed report? After all, what's to stop you from simply failing to mention crimes committed by your own kin? He gave her a look. Besides, if you see something and decide not to report it, what happens when the attack does come? How would you live with yourself? Dana wanted to cry, but the air was getting hotter and hotter this close to the edge of town. I can give him the answer he wants, but not the one he doesn't. He's never told us. He's never told me anything. He's never even mentioned other people out there. Of course not. It's because he knows just how many of them are dangerous. Half the funerals out there are hiding from warrants for their arrest, you know. He gestured broadly out at the wasteland, barely visible at the end of the street. That could easily become your life, you know. He gave her a pointed look as he pushed the radio into her bag. Think about it, Miss Harper. You can only protect your brother so much. I can help you, but I have a job of my own, and that's to protect the safety and property of the city. Send her on her way. She's got a long walk ahead of her. Eli drove her the rest of the way, and she climbed out slowly, bag slung over her shoulder. It was the first time she'd ever been to the edge of the city. The world beyond was nothing but dust. She saw old buildings, but they were patchwork with materials taken away or simply rotted and rusted through. The buildings she could see were far enough into the distance that it was hard to see past them. Suburbia. The old word floated into her mind. The residential and commercial blocks were all built up high enough that the sky was barely visible. Glass windows were too fragile to stand up to the storms, so she'd never actually seen the world beyond the city before. It wasn't a boundary wall so much as a series of windbreaks made from thick, heavy concrete. There was a road, which nobody ever used, and it wound back and forth through the huge walls, overlapping to block the wind. The further around the switchbacks she went, the more dust piled up against the walls. The windbreaks kept it out of the city for the most part, but it piled high on the outer perimeter. The second she stepped out past the windbreaks, the heat struck her like a physical blow. Her house had been in one of the few sectors of town that wasn't high-rises, but nobody went out in the sun if they could help it. She'd had to deal with humidity every year, of course, but... Oh, excuse me. But walking into the direct sunlight, it was like walking into an oven. Dana already felt exhausted. She had been outside the city for less than 30 seconds and already felt like she'd had her soul bought and paid for. The radio was heavy in her bag. Hey, if you find something fast, you could be back before you know it. Eli forced a smile on his face just for her. How far do you plan to follow me? She growled, not trusting her voice. Eli wasn't exactly on her side, but it still stung. Is there a problem here? An electronic voice scrawled suddenly. Dana turned. Out of nowhere, there was a figure, wrapped head to toe in rags. There was no face visible, under a paladin-style hat and sun goggles. Who's this? She wondered. Who are you? Eli asked, more surprised to see someone from outside the city than anything else. The figure held up one gloved hand as if to show it was empty, then closed a fist for a moment. But as the fist opened again, there were now 3 large strawberries between the fingers. It was the most extravagant magic trick anyone had ever seen. 3 strawberries, Dana could have stayed in a hotel for the weekend. One with police benefits, maybe even fresh food. The figure put the fruits across Dana's palm. She couldn't help but bring them up closer to her face. The smell was like nothing she'd experienced before. As she looked closer, she realized the seeds had been removed. It was precision work. There didn't seem to be any hint of the strawberry flesh removed with them. The ones available at the high-end restaurants were completely smooth, with no seeds ever present on them. Even without the seeds, it was an awe-inspiring gift. Eli's eyes were glued to the fruit as the figure faced her. You have a choice now. Dean? She wondered. In any event, it was true. The berries gave Dana a choice. Any guard would let her go for one of them, let alone 3. She could leave with the masked figure, or she could try and sell them to a restaurant, get enough food credits to see her and Micah through another month in the shelter. She could feed herself without having to join any extra work parties. So? The figure asked. Dana knew better. She'd never make it as far as Case Sector with a treasure like that, even if Crawley wasn't waiting to hear from her. She handed the strawberries to Eli. Please, don't ask where they come from. she told him, trying to hide the desperation she was feeling. He knew the strawberries couldn't possibly be legal. Eli almost smiled as he took them, knowing what she was thinking. The extravagance had done more to convince Dana of criminal activity than anything he could have said. Good luck out there. Our protagonist, Dana, finally prepared to leave the city after years upon years of what seems to be crushing cyberpunk existence. Oh. Sorry about that. Just needed to get a few stretches in. Let's. Any thoughts in chat, by the way? How do we like it so far? I'm certainly enjoying it. We're only a chapter in. Now we get to the fun part, where we actually start hearing about all the solarpunk stuff. You know that rig he mentioned? It's going to be very, very neat when we first see one. Anyway, chapter 2. Dana was quickly led along the outside of the boundary, heading for the dust dunes. The wind piled high against the windbreaks with every storm. I've never seen a berry like that. The bumps were for the seeds, right? You removed them? I had to, the digital voice told her. Seeded fruit is an infringement in town. He sees tiny holes in the skin. He assumes it's blight, but they're still priceless. That's what I mean. How did you get a seeded plant? Dana demanded as they walked. The wrapped figure planted a foot on one of the dunes and kicked the dust, which fell apart like water, revealing something buried within. Whatever it was, it had wheels. Come on. It took Dana a while to realize it was a motorcycle. It looked like a hard plastic spiderweb wrapped around an electric motor. It had been covered by a sheet of plastic, which her guide carefully shook clean and packed away neatly. Dana was presented with a helmet, which she put on without a word, climbing onto the motorcycle. Who are you? She asked, because if it was Dean, he would have said so by now. My name is Freya, her host said, holding out a pair of weathered goggles. Dean sent me to collect you. Some of us were a little leery about being this close to town. Freya paused. On that topic, do you have anything electronic? Anything with a connection? Dana held up her device, something omnipresent to everyone in the city, no matter how tight the cost of living was. The radio suddenly felt heavier. Freya nodded, unsurprised. Pull the battery. We'll make adjustments so that it's safe. Dana obeyed. It was an open secret that the law tracked people. It was how they fought squatters. Dana had no idea if that could work outside the city. The only person she knew who'd left was her brother. So when Freya turned to steer the motorcycle out toward the horizon, she quickly flipped the battery out of Crawley's radio, too. The motorcycle got them away from the city. What used to be called suburbia was either buried in dust or harvested to build the brakes. Within minutes, they were past any buildings. I almost forgot our favorite plush co-host, Bean Pal, who needs to get on lumbar duty tonight. Bye, Bean Pal. She'd never gone beyond the red line. The cycle wasn't even slowing down as the sun set behind them, but she was already further from home than she'd ever been. She looked over her shoulder and was surprised at how little she could see. The windbreaks hid everything else behind walls of fraying concrete, except the turbines and the towers. Not long after the city was out of sight, they came to the rig. Dana had never seen one before. It was the length of a bus, halfway between an RV and a water tanker. The outside was clapped together with tinted windows protected behind retractable steel shutters. Solar panels covered the rooftop, and the outside was adorned with cargo spaces and a harness to secure the cycle. The wheels were extended out like the legs of some mechanical insect, the tires thick and seemingly indestructible, on shocks that could ride through an earthquake. Looked like it could motor across the world. As they came closer, a familiar figure stepped down from the rig and waved. It was Dean. The motorbike rolled up alongside the rig, and Dana stepped off it, going to hug her brother. Whatever else, it was the first time she'd seen him in years. "Good to see you," she gestured back at her chauffeur. "Who's this?" "That's Freya. I asked her to collect you." Dean introduced them. There was some debate as to whether or not it was a trap of some kind. The implied threat from Crawley had sent Dana's nerves on edge. Why would these people be worried about a trap? Why would my brother be too nervous to go back to town? Freya took the power cell out of her motorcycle and handed it to Dean elaborately. Dana felt like she was watching a transaction. "So, Dana, welcome to the first day of the rest of your life," Freya said as the dull, sandy coverings fell away from the woman, revealing bright red hair and tan skin as Dana felt her jaw drop. Freya was wearing more color than Dana had ever seen in one place. They were work overalls, but they were made of some kind of fabric that seemed imbued with actual color. The coveralls had patches all done by hand, but rather than look ratty, it just made her look slightly bohemian. Her skin was marked with nature symbols, as though she was invoking the elements, but if the markings were paint or tattoos, Dana couldn't tell. Dana suddenly had a flashback to the dandelions pushing through the concrete. Seeing this colorful waif emerge from the gray dust color she'd wrapped herself in was something similar. While Dana processed this, Dean took the power cell, slotting it into place on the rig. There were a dozen such cells plugged into the main vehicle's battery wall. He removed a different one, checked that the charge was full, and handed it to Freya, who plugged it into her cycle. "They work on a lot of things," Dean explained to his sister's curious look as Freya rode off. "Redundant batteries mean I can power all sorts of gizmos without turning the rig off." Dana had power cells at home and had to admit the setup was a good one, but she didn't trust the construction. It didn't look anything like a city-approved system. "So, this is where you live?" She gestured to the dusty area around the rig, nothing but wasteland in every direction. "Not even close. Come on in, this rig's your home for a while, so I should give you the full tour. I've cleared out a cabinet for your stuff." "I don't have much," Dana admitted, hefting her new bag. "Wasn't really allowed to pack." Dana had spent a sleepless night on the floor of her brother's rig, wondering how her life had come to this. He'd offered her his own hammock, and she'd refused, fine with the camping cot she'd brought with her. But it was too wide to sit level, so she had to pack it up and settle for a sleeping bag laying in the aisle down the middle of the rig. Dana was tired, sore, and frustrated with the whole world when the light started to come through the tinted windows. Crawley's offer replayed in her head as she tried to doze. If her host wasn't family, she might have made the call already. More than half the construction in the rig was improvised. Her brother had always liked to tinker with things, after all. But Crawley wasn't interested in her brother. He wanted the others, the nameless ones, like Freya, whom Dana had never heard of before. If they're organized somehow in an attempt to take the city apart from afar, don't I have to report it? Wouldn't it be my job to help save lives? She got her first hint of what Wheeler life was really like once she observed her brother's morning routine. His device chimed an alarm, and Dean was awake with a groan. Dana groaned too. She hadn't slept more than an hour or two total. He'd stretched in the hammock enough that Dana heard his spine crack a little. A moment later, eyes still closed, he rolled out of the hammock, landing nimbly on his feet, and he kicked at the line where it was tied to the wall. The hammock was sucked up like a blind, spinning on its roller, but he'd already snagged out the blanket and the pillow with one hand. All at once, Dana couldn't tell where his bed had gone. Dean wasn't even looking as he turned the recessed handle on a cabinet, and instead of swinging open, the cabinet came out on rails. Dana was surprised to see a vanity unit, as well as a stainless steel coffee pot taking up the space in front of the mirror. Dean picked up his pillow again. Dana realized it was inflatable as he worked at the plug. With a pop, as though pulling a cork from a bottle of wine, Dean was suddenly pouring water out of his pillow into the coffee pot. The pillow was empty, quickly, and Dean rolled the empty bladder up, putting it in the cabinet where the coffee pot and mug had been. While he was brushing his teeth with one hand, he was combing his hair straight with the other. As he put both brush and comb to work, he swung a foot behind himself and hooked out the sliding pantry, collecting ingredients without even looking. Dean made a half turn to the left, and he'd immediately elbowed the vanity unit shut, and flipped up a panel on the countertop, revealing the hot plate within. Dana, still on the floor, was finally sitting up, watching this surreal dance. In the same movement, Dean had transformed the space from his bedroom to his bathroom to a breakfast nook in less than the time it took the hot plate to heat up the water. The kettle started to whistle, and Dean reached up to the ceiling. Dana suddenly noticed his cutlery stuck to the ceiling with strips of magnets. A steel mug, a camping-sized fry pan, row of utensils, too. The smell of instant coffee filled the rig as he sat down at his table. It was like the whole space was an extension of himself. It was a dance that he knew by heart and could do without thinking. A morning routine that would take Dana half an hour took her brother less than 5 minutes, and he did it all almost standing in place, with everything in reach, used efficiently and put away, all without a wasted movement. Dana strolled off the floor, feeling like an ungainly elephant in comparison. Morning. Morning. Dean reached across from his breakfast nook and flipped the toast in the pan over like a pancake. French toast? Can you immediately see why I was very interested in this book? I was never this, efficient in the morning in the RV. But, you could immediately see how I looked at this and went, yeah, I could see myself doing that. you know? What I know we run into later would make continuing to live in the RV a lot easier. But I digress. The breakfast unnerved her. Real food, not a protein pack. She'd taken the bag full of rations because Eli had insisted, and because it was poor form to give someone a mouth to feed. Farrells didn't use money from the city. They had no use for it. She couldn't pay for extra rations. And yet, Dean had just put out a spread of real food. Sourdough toast and Freya's strawberries from the day before. Such things were worth triple their weight in gold. Dean was folding down the solar arrays, ready to get moving again, and Dana slipped into the bathroom compartment. It was the first time she'd had privacy since leaving the city. In fact, it was the first time she'd been alone at all since leaving her house for the diner days before. The news is right. The Farrells are raiding the city for foodstuffs. Must be the high-end stuff, too. They'd never sell food like this in my sector. Can't even imagine how they'd get past security without being spotted. And yet, Dana could do nothing. She was at the mercy of her brother for at least a year. And when I go back, do I turn him in? Dean had secured the equipment for transport and called out to Dana. It was time to get moving. Dean? Dana called weakly from the privy. There's no toilet paper. We use something else. It's on your left. Dana was silent for a long minute. The fungus? Not fungus. It's moss. Easy to grow, antibacterial, degrades away to nothing. During World War I, the nurses used that stuff to wrap wounds because it kept things clean. We've been breeding it for medicinal and household use. You don't have anything else? Dean rapped hard on the door. Dana, if I find out that you've torn up a booklet or cut up your clothes to make toilet paper that'll clog up my Blackwater tank, I'll toss you out right here. Dana whimpered, but the privy was silent until the flush. She came out a moment later. That was unpleasant. It's the first time you've used a John without having to pay a fringe on the paper. Dana said nothing to that, but he wasn't wrong. Toiletries and hygiene products were sometimes listed as luxury fringe benefits, which was code for expensive. The government insisted that fringe utility was for luxuries. At street level, they were called fringe utilities because it was the fringers who got paid. You can't say anything. You have to tough it out for a year, she reminded herself. The drive across the hardpan lasted for a long time. The panels on the roof and the solar cell coating on the windows all fed into the batteries, even as the rig moved. Dana wondered where they were going. The panels alone couldn't charge the rig in real time. Even so, Dana stared out the windows, sitting beside her brother. She'd never been outside the windbreaks before. She'd never been able to afford eating or working in any place that was above the third or fourth floor. Seeing further than the next wall, it was never an option. Now she could see for miles. The ground was fairly flat, so there was some wide visibility. She'd heard about floods that lasted for months with a great storm, carrying mud as far as the eye could see. The mud had been sun-baked to be hard as rock, and went on for miles. Dana loved it. She was in the sun, and the rig kept her comfortably cool. While they drove, they caught up on her life. If she hadn't been watching for it, she might not have noticed, but in all his stories about some of the things he'd seen on the road, he never mentioned anyone but Freya, someone she'd already met. She noticed a cloud of dust off to the side. Freya's rig? She guessed aloud as it rolled into place ahead of them. Dana could feel the change in their movement as they moved into the slipstream. She had strawberries. She's either a master thief or an eccentric billionaire. Dean smothered a grin. She's neither. He was about to explain when his radio crackled. Skeetos, Freya shouted to them. Heading our way? Dean immediately pulled the rig to a halt and started flipping switches on his console. Dana could hear things locking in place from all over the rig. What's going on? Mosquito swarm. Dana felt a chill. The city had carefully killed every nest of the little bloodsuckers. The only thing with a higher body count than the storm was the viruses that followed, spread out on a cloud of those vampires. Are we... It's alright, champ. There's only a few vents and such. Happens often enough we can seal it all up with the push of a button. Mosquitoes are light enough that a breeze is all it takes. They go where the wind blows. We run the fans a little and keep them out. Right. Dana nodded, feeling further from home than ever. Crawley had warned her about a vast conspiracy to take down the city, but she really hadn't put that together with the idea of a large population. To Dana's thinking, population was central. If you had 3 rooms, you had 5 people. Where else would they go? Out in the wasteland, there had been huge open spaces, all of it devoid of anyone but her brother. Even Freya had been a surprise. When they got to Miller's scrapyard, there was already more than a dozen rigs lined up. All of them had the same sort of style as Dean's, but no two alike. Even so, from a distance, Dana could see people moving through the junkyard, all of them wearing bizarre patchwork colors. Dean pulled the rig to a halt alongside the others. Listen, I've got a little business to take care of. I'm afraid you can't come with me while I do. I'll stick to the rig. Stay out of everyone's way. You will not. Like it or not, this is your world for the next few months at least. You think you're going to spend the whole time being waited on? Dana stuck to Freya for a while. Dean had headed off at a quick march, and Freya stayed behind, unspooling electrical cabling from her rig to Dean's, connecting the solar panels on top of each vehicle. Dana helped her do it, scrambling up to the roof of Dean's home for the first time, and was surprised to notice it wasn't the only connection. The connection cables between the rigs were unexpected. The entire fleet was individually made, yet they all linked up with each other. She scrambled down and took a few minutes to examine the cables, surprised to see they all had identical connections. Get away from there! A voice barked fiercely, and Dana jumped. Her attacker was heavily freckled from the sun, with wide shoulders and a scowl on his face. He reached up and hauled her down hard from the side of the vehicle. Who are you? He demanded, looking hard at her clothing. The gray polymer cloth was cheap and plain, especially in comparison to the riot of colors that everyone else was wearing. You're not with us. Relax, Banner, the familiar voice called, and Freya came hurrying up to them. She's with me and Dean. She's static. She was messing with the microgrid. Of course she was. What do you expect? She's never seen anything like this before. Look, she's Dean's sister. She's not a threat. She gave Dana a pointed look. Are you? I was just... Dana shook her head. Ooh, there's a footnote on microgrid. We'll come back to that footnote. Banner shoved her over to Freya. Keep her away from the microgrid. Freya made a soothing motion and led Dana away quickly. Best to avoid that one. His bark is worse than his bite, but he's got people to protect. He doesn't trust new people as a result. The cables between the rigs? Dana nodded. Freya nodded back. Anywhere we park, we take our panels with us, so if there's more than one of us at any given place, it's a solar farm. But Dana waved a hand back and forth. I don't get how it can work. I mean, I've been watching you and Dean tinker things together by hand. How can all of them? I don't even know how to say it. How can we all have compatible systems? Not what you were expecting from a pack of feral cannibals, huh? Dana pulled her head in. That's not what I meant, she said unconvincingly. You'll find out. Freya laughed and gestured around the junkyard. You up for some scrounging? Dana winced. Scrounging was the modern equivalent of black marketeering back in the city. The Fringers watched for scavengers more there than almost anyone else. There are no Fringers here, though, she reminded herself. Freya, I heard from your dad. Weather models say our region is still at risk of permanent freeze. Don't count out the rest of Arcadia, Freya told the man, flicking her eyes along to Dana. They think they can head it off. Following along behind Freya, Dana overheard snippets of conversation here and there, and was struggling to feel anything but abject pity for the poor unfortunate Fearls. She quickly decided that the city news was right about life out here. As much as she was enjoying the colors that people were wearing, it was clear they were helpless and living in abject squalor. The people were picking through the scrap metal, taking bits and pieces, turning them delicately. Dana watched as one group found what they were looking for. They looked so thrilled comparing their prize with other scavengers. They looked happy. Over garbage. How wretched for them. There were children here, too, scrambling over everything and anything with impressive agility. It was clear they'd done it all before. They were old hands, ferreting about through the scrapyard like they had a sixth sense about what they were looking for. The children that weren't on the hunt were gathered in groups, working together on things that Dana couldn't guess at. Some of the circles were obviously classes, with one or two adults explaining things to the attentive students. The others were gathered around discarded computers, dismantling them with improvised or hand-fashioned tools. Dana found herself watching those groups as the kids prized small components from the abandoned technology and discarded the rest. But when she saw his face, she almost didn't register it. Then her brain caught up and she looked again. It's you, she said, fighting to remember the name. Magnus. The big spender from the city turned and smiled broadly. Well now, this is a surprise. He rose to greet her. Didn't think I'd be seeing anyone from the shelter again. He noticed Freya giving him a look and introduced himself. Magnus Redbone. I'm the new guy, or at least I was until everyone came rolling in. He announced he was leaving the city about a day and a half before me, Dana explained to Freya, looking back to Magnus. How'd you beat me here? I, liberated a set of wheels on my way out, Magnus said, almost bashful. When my first meeting happened, they realized I was new, they sent me here. What were you looking for? Freya asked. Friend or family? Most people leave the city because one or the other. Friend in my case, but apparently he's only here half the time. Magnus nodded and noticed Dana's scrutiny of his work. It's called urban mining. There's more gold, palladium, and other precious metals in a ton of electric waste than there is in a ton of ore taken from a mine. Of course, you start with a ton of ore. You have to refine it to get to industrial quality. You peel it out of a discarded phone or computer, well, it's refined already. And to mine it out, you need mining equipment. This is Freya, rather. And to mine it out, you need mining equipment. Here in a scrapyard, you just need a pair of pliers. Freya gestured around. Take a good look. You get some people who know what to look for, and it's a closed system. We take the scraps from the static world and outfit our whole lives. When the parts wear out, we return them here, and they get melted down or stripped out. Then they make it work again. Our recycling is close to 100% on everything. Ooh, there's a second footnote on the 100% recycling. Dana looked back at the 3D printers. They had printers in the city, of course, but they were under guards, surrounded by covers. so that nobody could observe the claimed idea being printed. Here they were open to the air, and she could see people adjusting the frames, twisting the wires together. They were changing the printer so they could print parts too large for the regular casing. She looked back to the urban miners, pulling little strips of precious metal out of the junk. The kids were giving her curious looks. Dana knew she stood out, given the city gray she wore, but the curiosity on their little faces suddenly made her realize the adults were less suspicious. Except for the man who'd been so angry before. Well, he was the exception. What did he mean about me being static? A banner? He meant you're from the city. Static? Because you live in mobile rigs and we stay in one place? Plenty of people stay in one place. Not all of you, of course. More and more vehicles arrived over the rest of the day. They didn't enter the junkyard. Instead, they parked in a circle. Dana couldn't believe it, but a market was suddenly forming. She saw the scrapyard metal being fashioned into meal trays, kitchenware, shelves. More than people could fit in the vehicles, she was certain. Some of these people live here. Then she saw the food. It was a large tray with a dozen leafy green lettuce piled high. She didn't realize she was following the food, eyes locked on the greens, until the other trays arrived to join it. Other people carrying trays with bread rolls or cuts of meat, cooked and still steaming. Dana went bug-eyed at the sight of all the blatant riches. The food was plentiful, and almost everyone was bringing a bowl towards some communal tables. The larger contributions were coming from deeper in the junkyard, and Dana found herself backtracking the trays of meat and vegetables. Further into the yard were rows of aircraft, with the engines and nose cones stripped out. Huge sections of metal were missing, and it was clear none of them would ever fly again, but the shape and size of them was clear. The larger ones dwarfed Dana completely, big enough to house dozens of rigs, let alone the people. Dana looked around as she noticed more trays of food coming out, but there was nobody trying to stop her. Food's under armed guard back home. Why isn't anyone stopping me? She made her way into the largest plane fuselage, and her jaw dropped. The Arrow Farms and Miller's scrapyard were big enough for people to walk in and collect the harvest. She could see row after row of different crops, different vegetables. People were harvesting, washing, and slicing in an improvised assembly line. Ooh, there's a third footnote. Dana bit her lip, remembering the strawberries Freya had given away. She grew them herself? Edible small space crops that grow day and night all year round? And it wasn't just salad being made. The big boxy Arrow Farms ran down the middle of the grounded aircraft, but along both walls were rows of metal cylinders about the size and shape of hot water tanks with large hatches on the front. Dana saw a few open ones, revealing slabs of raw meat on hooks. She'd seen these machines before in advertisements, culturing meat that was identical to real meat, with no farms or herds required. She saw people cutting large slices of meat off the freshly grown racks and taking them over to a barbecue pit. Ooh, there's another citation for the printed meat. Dana heard the sizzle of fresh beef and lamb on a grill, and her whole mouth filled with saliva suddenly. Someone jostled her from behind, and she realized she was in the way. Dana scampered aside, letting the tray full of fresh-made salad and still sizzling beef get taken out to the tables. She dumped aside again to let someone bring in an empty serving tray, and found herself standing directly in front of the barbecue. A woman was there, flipping cuts of meat, cooking both sides evenly. You look lost, also a little confused. The lady observed Dana's eyes roving around, as well as her city grays, and stuck out a hand. I'm Luca. Never seen this before, I take it. We have protein tanks in the city, or so they tell me. I've never really visited them myself, Dana heard herself say. They say the really upscale restaurants can grow whole sides of meat like you do here, but it's cheaper if you just make pure protein paste with them. Culture's a lot faster, and most people live off a diet of protein paste and dried seaweed. She breathed deeply. Haven't smelled anything like this barbecue in, well, ever. At least not that I can remember. The woman looked her over, and Dana had never felt so undernourished in her life. Luca produced a crusty roll of bread as if by magic, and immediately prepared a thick sandwich for her. "Well, consider this your first course," she said, adding a dash of some marinade that made Dana's mouth water. Dana wanted to gobble it down immediately, but she had to fight the instinct to throw it away. Food was tightly regulated in the city. Just holding this sandwich would put her back on the work parties for another month. Luca gestured behind her. "Either grab a tray or find somewhere to take that. There's a line for me." All the way back to the tables, Dana was waiting for the attack. The little urchins that gathered outside the diners would lynch her for such a sandwich. By the time she made it back to the tables, she saw that everyone had more. It wasn't an excess, but it was plenty. Enough for everyone to have their pick of servings, enough that nobody was fighting over any of it. Freya waved her over to sit between her and Dean and made a quick introduction to all the foods Dana didn't recognize. Coleslaw, hash, pulled pork. The marinade was running down her chin, and the others were laughing at her, but Dana didn't care. She felt tears forming in her eyes at the sheer feeling of fresh flavor exploding in her mouth. The casual wealth was truly terrifying in this setting. The spread was worth more than Dana would make in her lifetime. And those assembled were putting it out on folding tables in the middle of a junkyard. It had been less than an hour ago she was pitying them for picking through scrap metal. Food on the table would be worth a year of protein packs. The black market could give them a king's ransom. And these ferals were treating it like just another meal. It doesn't make sense. This isn't stolen goods. There's way too much of it. Nobody's trying to hoard it either. Freya apparently read her mind and leaned closer, speaking soothingly. About 12 years ago, a group fled the city and tried to form a freehold. They didn't want to share what they had. They had Fringer weapons, and they raided other places like this. When they needed food, they took it at gunpoint. When they needed water, they took it, hoarding every drop they could get. What happened? The people they raided had to move on with their air farms destroyed. Some of the raiders turned on each other. The rest had to keep raiding, since they had no allies or support. When something went wrong with their stolen equipment, there was nobody to help them or teach them how to replace it. When their food ran out, there was nothing left for them to steal from. She looked genuinely saddened by it. It should be the simplest thing. Life is easier when people help each other, and harder when they attack each other. Dana felt her stomach drop. She'd been clutching her sandwich like she was ready to fight for it, looking over her shoulder constantly. Freya turned back to lean against Dean comfortably, not pushing Dana any further. The market was forming organically right in front of her, and it made her hands shake. Not one of them was playing by the rules she'd grown up with, simply handing out excess food to anyone who needed it, or trading for handmade clothing, machine parts, utensils. Dana didn't see a single credit chip being scanned. Afraid she'd be able to retire on this one morning alone. Freya stayed with Dana and introduced her to a few people. They all wore the same colorful patchwork that Freya did, and Dana was starting to feel distinctly shamed by her plain city gray. Freya made trades of her own, swapping more strawberries for glass jar, lengths of pipe, spools of wire, and other things that Dana couldn't guess at. Freya led her out of the swamp and over to the space outside the circle of vehicles, where the newcomers had set up tables and toolkits. People were handing the tools back and forth, using them efficiently as needed. Freya noticed her look. Tools are heavy and varied. Better to share a toolbox between 3 people than it is to make 3 sets of the same tools. Not like we need all of them at the same time. Dana noticed that some of the workshops were making an arrow farm. This is how there are things in common. It's, what, made together? The term is crowdsourcing. There's not a lot of it in the city from what I hear. And most of what I do, what we do, is workshop for ourselves, but when there's something that can help everyone, or something that needs more than a few groups to collaborate, well, we have days like this, where we can update each other on what's available. For the most part, it's a matter of being efficient. But what if some people don't agree to change? Dana paused. Wait, you said from what you hear, you've never actually been to the city? Freya grinned. I'm the 3rd generation Wheeler. Was born at a maker's meet like this. That was the most unsettling thing Dana had heard yet. How could this kind of life last for generations? Freya blinked. What do you mean? All this is being built by, well, amateurs. Oh, we're trained. Freya nodded easily. The information your tradesmen got in the city is all available. We got experts and newbies just like any other trade, and the experts inspect every site, every project, every rig. They travel with the meets, usually. But it's not professional. The city's very selective in who's given a license in any trade. What is a professional but someone who makes a living by being skilled in something? Is it less of a profession if they travel to do it? While Dana tried to explain, Dean came over. There you are. So, I've finished my thing. You ready to go to work? Freya gave him a look. And just what do you think Dana and I have been doing all this time? Think we don't have anything to do but wait for you and your special clubhouse to let out? Dean's eyes flickered to Dana as though worried she was about to be let in on something huge. Freya, you're right, he said with over-dramatized penitence. I do apologize. I just thought Dana might like to see the lavender fields. What's lavender? Dana asked automatically and shook her head. Sorry, I told myself I'd stop asking over every little thing. The thing about asking questions, champ, means you get answers. Not sure if I'm not sure you can handle that if you only plan to stay for a few months. Freya had her device out. We've got work to do if we're heading out to the plantations. We're still at least a dozen condensers short. And let's get busy. Dean led the two of them like he was charging into battle, sweeping through the marketplace, collecting armfuls of components. Freya was at his hip, checking things off a list. Dana had little more to add other than helping to carry things. Eventually, they had enough for a trolley full and made their way back to the rig. Once back in her brother's workshop section of the rig, Freya tapped at her device and projected up a blueprint. Dana studied it a moment, turning back to the trolley of components, and immediately started comparing. You've worked assembly lines in a factory. Think you can follow the directions? Dana checked the diagrams again. I guess so, but what is it? It's a moisture collector. Can pull water out of air at less than 10% humidity. Oh, there's a footnote on the moisture collector. It's like conjuring drinking water from thin air. You guys don't seem to be hurting for clean water, Dana commented. Seeing the tankers full of drinking water pull up had been a surprise, but a bigger surprise was how short the queue was to get a ration. It's not for us, Freya told Dana. The Fringers watched every street, every entrance, every screen in the city. All of it fed to their headquarters. Crawley had the only office in town that was certain to be under no surveillance of any kind, which is why he took most of his calls there. Alai checked in later that night. She removed the battery from the radio as expected. More than half the deserters we approached do the same, Crawley said with the confidence of a king on his throne. The other source is still reliable. Keep the file open. She'll contact you before anyone else in town, Alai. If her brother is part of 451, we'll be ready before they can launch. Dana was closing up the last of the storage spaces when she noticed a familiar shape and took a closer look. It was a storage container, clearly not designed for use in the rig. It was meant to carry something, and from the shape of the frame on top of the lid, it was meant to be slung from cables. Dana had only seen it for a moment, and even then from a distance, the news had posted pictures of the wreck. The workshop in her brother's rig had a half-finished version of the container hauled by the balloon that had been shot down. The same weather balloon that had the news fretting about attacks from outside the city and has Crawley looking for criminal syndicates. My brother made it? She suddenly remembered why Freya had collected her from the city limits. It was because her brother had been concerned it was a trap. But now she knew why he was worried. Her brother was the one making probing attacks on the city. She suddenly remembered Dean's glance to her when Freya mentioned his secret clubhouse. He was worried Freya might reveal something. Her brother and his friends, they were the ones that Crawley wanted. Okay. Wait a minute. Where are the footnotes? There were like three footnotes there. Where'd they go? I was expecting footnotes at the end of the chapter. Um, let me go back and click these footnotes in order since we're at a chapter boundary here. Arrow Farms, I think was the first one. Where is that first footnote? Strawberries, mosquitoes. Ah, microgrid. Microgrids are operating in hundreds of areas already. They are defined by the ability to disconnect from the main grid and still interact with each other. This protects a microgrid from power failures on the larger systems. According to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, microgrids have the lowest mean costs in comparison to the commercial markets. Interesting. I've been curious about the viability of microgrids broadly, and I would love to see more work be done on how handy those could be. Hey, guys, no tussling. I'm reading. Yeah, yeah. Shake, shake. Everything's fine. Oh, recycling. That's the next footnote. There is, in fact, a global trade in e-waste. In some places, this is encouraged. In others, it's criminalized. This actually, the urban mining actually makes me think of an article I read recently where they were accepting essentially, they had an e-waste place, right? And then part of the e-waste's process for handling lithium batteries was actually to essentially process all the lithium batteries as though they were urban mining, which really, I mean, it's probably a lot cheaper than mining lithium traditionally. I mean, if you think about it, just off the top of the head, back of the envelope. Anyway, the arrow farms. Aeroponics is a well-established technology. It sprays nutrient water onto plant roots in a confined space, giving it the compactability of hydroponics, but using 95% less water than regular dirt farming. It was named one of Time's best inventions in 2019, and thus a compact version exists for this story. Yeah, if I ever move back into the RV, I'm definitely seeing how much or how little work it would be to rig up like some aeroponics somewhere in the RV because I've done hydroponics before with middling degrees of success. I did some tomatoes once that just did not work at all, but I've also done like leafy greens and herbs hydroponically before that have worked out really well. So like definitely I'm the more I read of this and the more I think about like the skills and tools I have on hand, the more I realize I could apply some of the rig concepts that are mentioned in here to my RV. And I never thought about using aeroponics. I was just like, oh, well, hydroponics would slosh around too much, so I guess I can't do it. But aeroponics, they don't have near as much water to slosh around and spill. It just kind of mists over the roots. So, like, I never thought about that. What's really tempting is aeroponic strawberries. Because, like, strawberries, if you think about it, berries broadly are kind of spendy. And, like, strawberries are very willing to like spread and grow so you could get arbitrarily large volumes of strawberries, so like it's very tempting to me, not to mention that strawberries are mentioned in the story. Anyway, the moisture, the moisture collector. In 2018, MIT developed a device that could extract drinkable water from air as dry as 10% humidity. Until this point, there were extractors, but they required a heavy fog to work. This new invention's proof of concept for a future homemade version, so it fits in the story. That's the thing. This is really interesting. I know what they're doing with these moisture collectors, so it actually makes sense. Um, you'll see when we get a little farther. But the moisture collectors, they're actually very slow, and there's only so much humidity that can be in like a given volume of air. So they're very slow and they kind of drip feed you water. So it's you got to be patient if you're going to be using them. But it's a really good concept and it'll be really great in the right context. There's a lot of things that are mentioned in this story that are like they don't get used out of context broadly in like our current day-to-day society, but there are a lot of things that get mentioned that would be either very situationally useful and they are applied in said situations where they are useful in this story, or they are extrapolations from existing technology that it makes sense for them to be able to be that much farther ahead, 40 years from now, whatever now is. To steal a joke from Watchtower Database. Actually, on that note, um, it's actually time to take a little breather, a little break. So we will come back later for chapter 3. It's time to take a little break, a little breather. Uh, I'm going to be right back. Do do drink water. Get up and stretch. Pet your pets for me. Maybe have a little snack. All that kind of thing. We'll be back in about 15 minutes, and we'll be diving into chapter 3 when we get back. See you in a back, shall we? Attend, O reader, our tale of wonder. Welcome back to Paper Cuts, everybody. Last time we got up to chapter 2 of Wheelers by Matt Stevens, which, of course, we're reading by author permission, which is generally very exciting. This time we're going to dive into chapter 3 and, continue to enjoy the fruits of this slowly unfolding solar punk world in front of our main character here. Oh, for context, if you missed last time, essentially this person, Dana, got kicked out of her house because she wasn't keeping up with her utilities, and she was having to live in a shelter because there's no homes for anybody, and it was generally all very like grim and dour and cyberpunk and horrible. And then she gets an email from her brother who is like, "Hi, we're living out in the wastelands beyond the city. If you need some help right now, I heard what happened to you." And eventually, she lives a few weeks in the city in a shelter, and then is like, "I can't do this anymore," and has left the city and is now experiencing what it's like to be outside of the imposing cyberpunk city she was living in. Let's dive into chapter 3, shall we? The next morning, Dana stepped down from the rig and joined everyone for breakfast. Dana had found herself drawn to the largest of the aircraft. She'd seen the farms in one, but there were others. One was a dormitory, another was a large workshop. With the cargo ramp down, she could see another rig, half assembled, sitting in the middle of the cargo bay, with various people assembling it and running wires. The wings of the plane had solar cells and water catchment running feeds inside, and tables with food being set up outside. "Penny for your thoughts?" Dean asked. "What's a penny?" Dana asked and then shook her head. "No, never mind. I was just thinking. Clearly the life out here isn't what the news said it would be like, but it really can't be that much better than the city, or they'd be doing things this way back home." An explosion erupted, strong enough to make the ground shake. Dana froze like a hunted animal, struck deaf from the blast. Dean threw them both to the ground and covered her as the blast rained over them from behind. Debris rained down over them, and Dana fought to stand, trying to find something she could hide under. The rain was lethal bits of metal scrap. As the ringing in her ears faded slowly, Dana looked up wearily from the smoke and haze to hear the sounds of screaming and wailing. There were injuries, a lot of them. "Freya," Dean coughed. Dana's overloaded brain noticed a man she'd seen here and there hurrying toward the blast. "Anyone who could hear my voice!" he shouted, and she could barely make out the words over the ringing in her ears. and with first aid or medical training to me. Dana herself had no such training. Something else to learn, she told herself, her brain reeling enough for the out-of-character thought. So that I know what to do next time. Will there be a next time? Banner, we gotta get the cams up, Dean shouted. Banner appeared from nowhere, looking focused and more prepared than anyone else. Dana was left wringing her hands, feeling utterly helpless. In the city, she would know what to do, clear the area, and stay out of the way until the certified professionals arrived. She could go to the radio and call for help, but they were so far away from here. Surely they wouldn't come help Ferals. To help Wheelers, Dana told herself. To help the children. And Dana started running towards the fire. Whatever else she could do, maybe she could help the children. She wasn't the only one. There was a line of people bringing buckets and heavy cloth to get the fires out, others slapping together anything they could find to make stretchers for the injured. There were some bodies scorched beyond recognition, and Dana saw a severed leg lying on the ground. She forced herself not to look at it. Where's Luca? Where's Magnus? I can't see anyone I know. Armed with one of the heavy cloths smothering grease fires was Freya. Dana called out her name and came running to help. Where's Dean? She had lost track of her brother completely. He's okay. He's trying to get the surveillance drones up. Help me with this, Freya called back. Dana did so, having no idea what Freya meant. Surveillance drones? Why? Then it hit her. The blast came from the junker, didn't it? Dana coughed around the smoke. It was rigged to explode. She helped smother some of the smaller fires. Dean's trying to get your surveillance drones up because they want to know if there's another strike coming. Freya nodded. Yeah. She gestured over to the injured and the man who had called any medics to his side, apparently a doctor. Morris needs help. Getting the fire out took hours. Taking care of the wounded took a while longer. Dana found herself working with Freya, who had first aid skills. Dr. Morris needed all the help he could get. Most people had basic first aid, and Dana was good at following instructions. But eventually it was over. The Wheelers gathered in a semicircle at the edge of the junkyard. Morris looked exhausted, with dried blood on his sleeves and big dark circles under his eyes. I've done what I can for the injured. Time will tell what the final count is, but so far we've got 11 dead, 17 injured. Only 4 of them seriously, since... He trailed off. The serious injuries had mostly been fatal. Anyone who can take on one of the injured for care, I can show you what to do, and there are several places on the map that will accept patients. Banner took over the briefing at this point. It's a rigged garbage drone, which we knew, but there are no signs of any more coming, or any ground forces either. It was just an accident, which seems unlikely, or they decided to rig a drone after they realized what we do with their scrap. Our best guess is that the statics are reminding us to leave those drones alone. Are we leaving? Someone asked. If they actually cared about any of this stuff, they'd keep it, Dana thought with certainty. Why the strike? That's what we've got to decide. Obviously, if the place isn't safe, we'll go, but there's been no follow-up, no sign of anyone actually coming here to arrest or attack anyone. To be honest, we can't see any point beyond hurting people that happen to be close to the drop point. For now, the choice of what you can do is up to you. Miller's isn't the only scrapyard we can harvest, and for that matter, not the only one we do harvest. Anyone who wants to stay can do so. Everyone else, we're regrouping at Xanadu Station. Morris spoke up again. We're moving the wounded to freeholds. Anyone who can take the serious cases, I can show you how to move them safely. Dean glanced at Freya. Guess we're an ambulance now. They took 2 of the injured, one in Dean's rig, the other in Freya's. Morris put them both on stretchers and lashed the stretchers to the hammocks that Dean and Freya slept in. Their mutilated bodies swayed but didn't bend or bounce. While the doctor set them up, Dana waited outside the rig and noticed her brother lost in thought. What are you thinking? When I was a kid, I remember reading about shelter rats in the city trying to eat out of the garbage behind diners and such. To combat the problem, they sprayed the garbage down with poison every night. They didn't post any warning signs. I remember left them with a bunch of dead homeless people around the dumpsters. That blast didn't cost them anything but the explosives and a bit of wire. Banner's wondering if it's an accident. There's no follow-up. And you figure the city was willing to blow up a bunch of ferals just because it was something to do? Better dead than fed? There's no other reason to do this, is there? I'll tell you this, the timing was bad for us, Freya put in. Our harvest just finished. There are arrow farms built in the larger craft of the yard. If we abandon this place, it'll take a while to build that back up. You think the attack was timed to make the survivors hungry? Dana was surprised at that. No, I mean, how could the city even know about the meat or what kind of farms we have out here? She chuckled, waving at Dana. Until recently, you still have wondered if we ate each other. Dana found herself watching Dean. Before I left the city, something came over the windbreaks, Dana said swiftly, not letting herself chicken out. It was a weather balloon towing some kind of container. The news said the container was empty. The rumor was that someone outside the city was making a probing attack to see how hard it would be to get something over the walls. Dean froze and very slowly turned to look at her. Yes? He knows I saw the identical container in the rig, Dana warned herself. He knows I'm asking about whatever he's up to. Aloud, she tried to be casual. Well, if the Wheeler side of the walls was probing, then maybe the city is too. Well, if someone in the city was injured, I can see why they'd want to make a strike in return. Was anyone hurt? He knows the weather balloon didn't leave a scratch on anyone. No, thankfully. At least, not that I know of. Say it, Dean. You know we're talking about the same thing. Just say it. Tell me what the container in the rig is for, please. But he didn't say anything more, and the silence stretched on. Morris stuck his head out the window. Ready to roll out. Dean and Freya made their way to the respective driver's seats. Morris couldn't stay with both patients, and Dana would ride with Freya while he rode with Dean. Well, she still could. She held out a hand to Morris, and he shook it through the window automatically. We haven't been properly introduced. I'm Dana. Morris, I hear you're new. How are you enjoying it so far? Does this sort of thing happen often? Morris shrugged back. If it was a strike and not an accident, this would be the first time since I joined the cause. As they drove, slower than normal for their fragile passengers, Freya spoke to Dana. That weather balloon that invaded your city, your brother built that. I launched it. Dana felt a thrill go through her, the blatant confession. Crawley made it sound like the start of a war, and Freya wasn't hiding it. Why? Same reason we'll be launching another one tonight, unless I miss my guess. Retaliation for the drone blast? Freya actually laughed at that. Oh, rookie. No, of course not. We don't do that. Those launches aren't about attacking people. They're high-altitude tools. We use them as comm towers when we have to contact the coastal projects. The projects? I've heard a little about that. Where are they? Oh, they're a long way out, Freya admitted. That's why we need to send up relays when we have to contact them. See, some of our people are mobile, but the projects aren't. Those are the places we've set up forever, since we're all spread out in how we get food and water and electricity and everything else. The Wheelers like you, or you and Dean, are the supply line for the projects? Dana felt immeasurably better. The balloon's just an antenna, set up for you to talk to them? We don't have satellite radios like statics do, Freya nodded. We improvise. Those high-altitude balloons are useful for all sorts of things. The reminder of the radio that Crawley had given her made Dana want to wince. She'd found the source of the launch, and apparently it was the sort of thing Wheelers used all the time. If she could tell Crawley that, he'd see it as a threat. What happens now? I don't even know what the blast was about yet. I can't tell you if there will be a second one until it happens. Freya shrugged. The Wheelers have been at Miller's for more than 30 years. The scrapyards were the first places we set up permanent residence. Miller's is the closest to town. Hasn't been any action from the city out here in all that time. Simply never noticed us or cared. At least until now. The comms crackled as Banner's voice was broadcast. People, before you get out of range, log into the mesh and update your security patches. That junker was flying for a day. And when using an older encryption, by the time they reach Xanadu, will be locked out of the network. Dana watched as Freya quickly tapped at her device. They're updating their security encryption, just in case this blast was a deliberate attack. She was stunned. My device hasn't had a signal since I left the city limits. I can't even access my brother's devices from mine. Which means they have their own internet? I mean, they make their own software? That's not something you make out of scraps by hand. How extensive is the world beyond the red line? Banner had checked his notes twice and turned to his comm, entering 3 different security codes. Took several seconds for someone on the other end to do the same, but eventually his screen lit up with the face of Waker, the best techie in the Arcadian network. Waker was in charge of electronic security, relaying data back and forth between every station and freehold in the region. Banner, using your fractal encryption program to recode this conversation every 2 seconds. Put us in conference with Yana. Waker did so, and a second face appeared on the screens. A much older woman with silver hair and a bright red scarf framing her face. Banner. Banner quickly informed her of everything that had happened. We're sending the wounded on to places they can recover. The determination has been made that we'll have to cool it with a scrapyard for a while. Banner looked dark. It wasn't a unanimous choice, but for now it's the safest one. Everyone's taking a load out to the projects or the freeholds. If we can't keep the regular routes going in the short term, our best bet's to make one large delivery to them, bring one large delivery back. We're going to lay in the supplies for the autumn, come back to Miller's in winter, and see what the prognosis is. Remember, this is just one scrapyard. There are many others out there, to say nothing of the abandoned places. There hasn't been a deliberate attack since Sushan's day. You really think this was deliberate? No way to be sure, but we're closer to the city than I'd like. Wait! Waker suddenly interrupted the call, looking over at something off-screen. We're getting reports of another blast. This is one of the Valdez project. Supply boat blew up. So, it's not an accident. They stopped to recharge the rig halfway to their destination. Their truck stop was a charging station. The solar panels were erected like branches on a tree. The structure seemed to extend underground, likely where the batteries were stored, out of the weather. Dean hooked up the rig quickly. Morris stayed with the patients. Freya set out some snacks, and they more or less relaxed under the shade of the metal tree. Dana looked up at it. It's not concrete, she said finally, poking at the base. Everything in the city's concrete-based. Almost never works out here, Freya explained to her. Concrete takes some pretty serious heat for construction quality, but you've seen where we get our metals. She gestured up at the branches, and now that she looked, Dana could make out the welds. This solar collector's frame had been salvaged from the junkyard they just left. You see the design? Like trees. We went the same way underground. There's metal extending outward like roots. You pack it in with large rocks, and it's stormproof. This is a big job for a bunch of people who use hand tools, Dana observed. Yeah, but it's been here a decade. Still works perfectly. We have someone check the battery quality. We learned how to keep the panels clean of dust. Rather, this is Dean. Yeah, but it's been here for a decade and still works perfectly. We still have someone check the battery quality. We learned how to keep the panels clean of dust. This thing will outlive all of us put together. Dana looked again. The solar tree had power cells plugged in at its base. Dean pulled a power cell from his rig and swapped it out. Dana could see the monitor on the cell. He just collected a full battery and replaced it with a nearly flat one. The standardization of it all slapped her again. Everyone like you uses charging stations like this, don't they? She pointed out. Except it's flat now, so the next guy had better not be here for a few days. Dean nodded. We're heading to a project which is fairly well off the main roads now. I'd be surprised if anyone comes this way for weeks other than us. Despite herself, Dana looked around. There were only the 3 of them for as long as she could see. She stood up and shut her eyes, extending her arms out as far as she could. She felt open air. She took a step, then another. Open space, wide open space. When she opened her eyes, she found that they were watching her. Dean knew what she was doing, but Freya looked confused, so he explained. My sister had claustrophobia as a kid. I told her to shut her eyes and stretch as far as she could. If she could find anywhere in the house that was wider than her wingspan, then she could be in outer space if she wanted. You were right. When I grew up, there was only one spot left in the house where I could do that without bumping into things. Plenty of wide open spaces out here, newbie, Freya chuckled. It's how we live. When it's something nobody needs, you can usually have as much of it as you want. They were back on the road soon after. Dean had checked the gauges on the solar tree and typed the readout into his device, updating his map of the region. There were hundreds of different icons spread across the whole map. She saw the charging station they just left. Each icon had something similar. Dana stared in disbelief at the map. It looked up to date. It looked like the sort of thing that multiple people would use in tandem with each other so they didn't get in each other's way. Crawley's instruction to look for conspiracy rang in her ears. Dean noticed her scrutiny out of the corner of his eye as he drove. "You're comparing everything you've seen so far to what they've been telling you back in the city?" "Yeah. Good." Dana bit her lip, trying to put it into words. "Back in the city, even with expenses so tight and the fringers breathing down your neck every minute, it's easier than out here." She tried to break it to him gently. "You want water, you turn on a tap. You're not at the mercy of weather or of luck. There hasn't been a mosquito bite on anyone in years because we destroyed all the nests, and it's just safer. Dean, I admit there's a life out here, more than most people in the city think is possible, but there's no way this kind of life can keep you going forever." She reached out a hand to him. "I'm ashamed to say I couldn't keep up with the fees, but I can get it back. You helped me. Let me make it up to you when I get the house back. We can both go home." Dean's face had fallen in resignation a little. "Okay," he said with a sigh. "You aren't there yet. Dean," he waved it off. No, it's okay. You'll get there. On the subject of there being more life than you thought, wait till we get to our next stop." He glanced over at Morris. "Speaking of that, Doc, can you handle a rig?" Morris looked up as Dean called over to him. "Yes." Dean pointed at Dana. "We can't take her to someone's freehold without telling them a newbie's coming. It's not like we can leave her on the side of the road overnight, but we were heading to one of our projects anyway." An hour later, they shifted their wounded patient to Freya's rig, and Morris went with Freya in one direction, while Dean took his sister in another. They drove for hours until they reached a cultivated field of lavender plants. Dana had never seen lavender growing before. It was in little patches all over the place, but Dana was just starting to realize that even the most chaotic parts of Dean's life weren't random at all. In some kind of pattern that followed the sun or the drivable terrain, there were patches of purple all over the place. Her brother had printed out a roll of solar cells from the 3D printer in his rig during the trip. A major infringement, she knew this. They had salvaged enough junk from the scrapyard to make frames for them. Ooh, there's a footnote about the solar cells. Printable solar cells have been available since 2007, but are not as feasible, as they're short-lived and don't harvest as much as the regular panels. Nonetheless, the concept works, and this is a story that embraces the idea of 3D printing and homemade devices, so the proof of concept is enough. Also, in 2020, an Australian team was able to make solar panels work efficiently with copper parts, rather than silver ones. The common metals make it even easier to see a DIY option in the future. Very, very satisfying. I was just wondering, like, yeah, like a rollable, like if you think about it, solar cells are pretty, flexible. So like a roll of solar cells makes sense. I didn't know that they could make printable solar cells. Hopefully that tech advances and maybe we can get past some of the troubles of doped silicon too. That'd be nice. Specialized stuff, that doped silicon, but the really good panels require it. So we'll see. But like it said, like the footnote says, this is the type of story to take something that's almost feasible and run with it. Anyway, Dana watched for a few minutes. Her brother would hammer the frame into the dirt and secure a sheet of solar cells over the top, making a little shelter. He'd check the time, then see where the shadow was cast, then brought over seedlings. After they were planted, he collected one of the condensers he'd assembled the day before, securing it to the frame where it would get sunlight. And while doing this, he walked her all through it. The solar cells work to power the condenser and monitors. We angle them to provide shade in the afternoon, when the sun's hottest. The morning light will be enough to help it grow. The solar cells aren't completely lightproof either. Our friends will be through with a queen and a hive once we make a place they can survive. The lavender keeps the beehives fed. The bees feed us honey, as well as pollinating everything else we plant here. Dana looked at him. What else is planted? Not much, yet, but that'll change in time. Lavender doesn't need a lot of water, so there'll be excess. Dean gestured off to the far side of the flowering area. We built a water trap down below the surface for the excess to collect as groundwater, away from the lavender roots, ready for the rainy season and for when we need to plant something else. He stood and brushed the dirt away from his hands and knees. This is a long-term project. In 100 years, this could be a forest once the soil's ready. This is what I was talking about with the condensers, by the way. Lavender, as he mentions, doesn't necessarily need a whole lot of water. So, the the fact that they're playing a really long game here and they're planting plants that don't need a ton of water makes these condensers very viable here. Just interesting. Anyway, where was I? It was a beautiful sight, and Dana felt something inside her relax suddenly. Something she hadn't even noticed was wound tightly. She'd never experienced quiet before. She knew there were container farms and vertical farms back in the city, but they were noisy things, full of moving parts, constant and automated. The condensers were silent, as were the solar panels. And that was when it hit her. The junkyard had been a scramble of people working. Out here, there was nobody but the two of them. And Dana suddenly realized it wasn't a coincidence. She joined her brother in his workshop. The others know what you're working on? Of course. Back at the scrapyard, nobody tried to stop me. The food, the arrow farms, there were no guards, no weapons. That's how it is out here. We have secrets to keep, just like everywhere else, but we don't keep anything secret if it's needed. You don't hide food or water. You don't hoard material or medicine. I know you're not planning to stay yet, but... Yet, he says, ever so confidently. But, if you ever did, you'd want your neighbors to be your friends, right? How can your neighbors trust you if they're starving and cold when you're full and warm? It's just good sense for everyone to know where their next meal's coming from, or else they'll eat each other. City thinks that's what you people do out here. City thinks that's because it's how they'd turn out if the rations ever ran out for 10 minutes. It's not like anyone's has much saved up for the lean times. Dana winced at this. It was true. But to herself, she wondered if Banner had been so aggressive because he was protecting something. Crawley had told her there's a conspiracy out here, somewhere. What are you doing? She gave herself a quick mental slap. You're not helping the Fringers arrest your brother. But if it had been anyone but Dean... Dean showed her twice, and then it was Dana's turn. The field they were growing was really large, and they were expanding it. Row after row of shelters, with row after row of life beneath it. Here and there, some had grown enough to reach out from under their protection. The next day, Freya and Morris arrived in the other rig. Looks like they'll make it, Morris reported on their former patients looking out over the fields of plants. Oh, this is beautiful. First time to one of these projects, Doc? Yep. Morris crouched next to the flowers, rubbing them gently between his fingers to bring the scent back up to his nose, and breathed deep. You spend some time with wounds and blood, something natural and alive. It's restorative. Good medicine, if you will. He winked at Dana. Dana was still learning how it worked, but she helped out where she could. Morris had steady, certain hands, and was endlessly patient with her. Dean and Freya worked together perfectly, like they'd done it 1,000 times before. Everyone at the scrapyard had been the same, but their way with each other was so light and happy that it was almost... Well, Dana suddenly had an epiphany and sidled over to Freya as soon as Dean left them for the moment. Just before I joined you, my brother was trying to convince me to leave the city anyway. He told me there was a rig up for grabs, but only if I went for it right away. I was too late, apparently. Freya nodded, carefully. You were less than 4 hours away when you came and got me from the city limits. Dana continued, being more certain as she spoke. You got the second rig, didn't you? The one he wanted me to take? Your rig is the one he wanted me to have? Freya sighed and gave a nod. Yep. Dana smothered a laugh at this. I have no intention of taking it from you, of course, but you're stuck with us. You've stuck with us everywhere we've gone for days now. By any chance, were you and my brother sharing his rig before I got here? Freya flushed a bit, but her expression didn't change. Maybe. Dana gave her a sentimental look. You know, even when our parents were alive, he never once introduced us to anyone he was seeing. Freya's blush faded slowly. Well, she said, for a lack of anything better, I wouldn't say this counts as bringing a girl home to meet the family. She glanced for him over her shoulder. But the topic of making it permanent came up once or twice. Ah, Dana nodded. So what was his plan exactly? There's a rig up for grabs. If he can talk me into taking it, then you move back in? Freya nodded. And if you said no, then he could get a second rig as backup. He gestured out at the horizon. She gestured out at the horizon in general. One thing a wheeler doesn't have often is a whole spare system. We build our own redundancies, but given how we live, there's only so much spare you can take with you. Having me with him means we can share resources. You see how we produce food and parts. 2 workshops and container farms make lighter work. Or you could drive off in another direction, Dana pointed out. Freya looked at her in disbelief and then softened as though reminded of something. Dana, regardless of what your brother means to me, there's no way I'd abandon my job. It's too important. Hang on, I just thought of something. Do I have... Oh, this isn't... I just, immediately I was like, I wonder if I can change the font. Is that a thing I can do from here? Font choices. Do I have Open Dyslexic on here? LMNO. I don't have Open Dyslexic. That's why I haven't been using it. Well, never mind. I'll look into that, actually. I've been meaning to do it for a while. Because I don't know about you, it makes me read faster. And I don't even have dyslexia. It's just makes the letters all stay put harder. Anyway, that thought chased Dana into sleep later that night. Her job is too important. What job? Nobody here uses money, either cash or electronic. I've seen barter, but for the most part, everyone shares and shares alike. Dana gave up on sleep and pulled out her notebook. Dana had been learning as she went how everything worked and had been keeping careful notes. Otherwise, she'd have to ask a question every 4 seconds, and that got old real fast. Dana had resolved to be as invisible as possible until she could go home. She checked her notes again from the beginning, and suddenly realized she'd been looking at it all wrong. When she'd left the city, she'd been met by Freya, whom she'd never heard mentioned before. When she met up with her brother, she'd seen actual food and assumed it had been stolen. When she arrived at the scrapyard, she assumed the ferals were scavenging for anything they could sell or trade with each other. But she'd seen more of their world now. She'd seen what they did with their salvage at the junkyards. She'd seen what they did with their food and even how they produced some of it. She'd seen lavender fields being planted and set up to grow in the hard pan under scorching sunlight. Freya's comment of how she'd never leave because her job was too important had been the real clincher there. They weren't just randomly meeting up as they scavenged about. They knew where to go to meet and trade, and which of them would be setting up beehives, and who'd be producing seedlings, and which charging station would be low on power. It was organized. These people were all working to a plan. They were all part of it. They aren't feral at all. When Dana woke up the next morning, Dean was gone. She saw Morris stretched out asleep on top of a sleeping bag, unconcerned with exposure. Freya's motorcycle was missing from its rack. Freya was sitting on the step of her rig with a coffee cup. Dana yawned and walked over to her. What's happening? Dean had to make a trade, Freya reported. He wanted to take you along, but I talked him out of it. Dana had a brainwave. Those gold flecks that the kids stripped out of the junkyard computers, he took them for currency. Clever girl, Freya chuckled. There aren't many who still take gold and silver. Which means he's not meeting people like you? Which is why you talked him out of it. Her stomach dropped. He's in danger, isn't he? Freya gestured over Dana's shoulder with a grin. Ask him yourself. Dana turned and felt herself relax. There was a motorcycle coming, and Dean waved as he approached, rolling up to the rig. As he swapped out the power cell by road, he tossed a plastic vial to Dana. Morning, champ. Dana looked at her brother's prize. Is it seeds? Dana almost sounded out the word, sounding nervous. How many? In that tube? 15. Dean reported, winking at Freya. Jirichi sends his love. I think he's still sweet on you. His nose twitched. Coffee? Freya snorted and went back into her rig to fetch him some. Dana was suddenly nervous, pushing the vial of seeds back at him desperately. It's illegal. Why? The answer came, regular as clockwork. Dana was really starting to hate that patient, knowing tone. It's an infringement. Yeah, it is. So what? In my head, I know those rules mean nothing to you, but if you got caught with this back in the city... Dana, has it occurred to you that we don't have total anarchy out here? That we aren't performing human sacrifices or resorting to cannibalism or any of the million other things the statics think we're about? Somewhere between mass evacuations from millers and having classes on do-it-yourself power generation, that much has sunk in, yes. And all without fringers looming over us every second. What's that tell you about infringement laws? He opened the vial and held up a single seed. You're right. Back in the city, this would be a life sentence in a work camp. Why do you think that is? Because it's clearly not to protect us from each other. We'd have chaos out here away from the lawmen. Dana stared at him. She'd realized they were organized, but had not made that connection. She was thinking about it now, and she didn't like any of the answers she was getting. I don't... Tell you what, her brother said, not pushing. How about we leave that idea to itself for a while? You want to talk about it more? Just ask me. For now, he examined the seeds carefully, smiling warmly at them like they were some rich treasure. For now, this one's for you. For me? I can't take that. Can't take it or can't take it back to the city? Can't take your journal back either. Dana was about to answer when Morris got up and came over, stretching. Morning, gang. Morning, Morris, Dana chirped, suddenly bright. Can I make you some breakfast? Dean reacted to her sudden offer. She hadn't cooked anything for herself since leaving home, not even for her family. Dean went right to work with his seeds, and Dana helped. It was the first time she'd planted anything. Freya opened up the private aero farm in her rig, and Dana felt her jaw drop, seeing it for the first time. Dana felt her jaw drop seeing it for the first time. Freya slid the seedling tray into place, but Dana's eyes were glued to Freya's strawberry plant. It was growing in the usual basket, but the strawberry fruits were growing in bunches, like grapes. Hang on, let's do the footnote, and then I have a story to tell about this. Scientists have achieved this with cherry tomatoes. CRISPR was used to gene edit the plant and make the fruit grow in bunches. The original plan for this innovation was food production in space, but in a future where gene hacking becomes more widespread, there's no reason not to include a successful proof of concept in this story. So this moment here with the strawberries growing in like a cabinet in her rig, genuinely made me go, I wonder how hard standard strawberries are. And then for a few years I had a strawberry bed where I was parking the RV over the winter. And I got strawberries I got a pretty good batch of strawberries out of that strawberry bed until I couldn't keep up with maintenance being in the RV and being away when it was the right time to cover them. But again, this has me very tempted, like looking at spaces, in my apartment and like out back. I'm like, how much work would an aeroponics rig be? Because like, if you think about it, aeroponics cannot be that hard, right? Especially if you have like a pump with a mister nozzle on it. It'd be very simple to just kind of like, have it put together suchly that it sprays on a timer or like controlled by like a small computer. Like, heck, I've got around here somewhere. Oh, it's on the back end of my desk. I've got a Raspberry Pi sitting on the end of my desk. I've been debating what project I want to use it for. It wouldn't be too bad to control like or like to run into like say an Arduino to then have the Arduino run timed aeroponics sprayers, and it'd be a great use of the limited backyard space there is around here. It's just something I've been thinking about. I need to like draw up plans and da 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 da. Keep an eye on the Discord for that actually. Speaking of which, I do have a Discord. I haven't been promoting it quite as thoroughly as I should be here in the podcast feed. But it's real. If you have any large opinions that you want to share with me, Discord's a great way to do it. You just drop by. It's pretty quiet in there. But I make an effort to make some very fun and interesting content in the Discord. Every time I go live, it's announced there. Every time I bake bread, if I remember to post a picture, the Discord gets first rights to any bread posting or any recipes I'm making. And the Discord is the only one to get the crumb shots on the bread. Uh, if you want the crumb shots on the bread, you got to come to the Discord and see them. I I also wind up posting plenty of pictures of my cats and like all the little visible mens I do. There's a lot of little stuff like that that I don't necessarily post anywhere else, or if I do post it anywhere else, it's on a much longer time delay than pretty immediately when it's happening. So the Discord's a great time. Uh, I like it. While I'm promoting things, I also, for the live listener, I do have a podcast. I mention, oh yeah, the podcast feed. That's because this is a real podcast. I edit down the live video into a little bit more condensed audio, and it comes out. We're in the process of actually editing my release schedule currently. As we work through the backlog of season 2, we've just been dropping episodes in the bomb format, all at once, uh, just once a month. But as we move into season 3 episodes, I'm going to split them up in such a way that I can actually get them hopefully weekly, if not bi weekly. We'll see. I'm still working out the shape of that, but ideally they're going to be a little bit more spread out, a little bit more consistent. If the podcast is not your jam, but you still want to interact with things that happen due to the stream, YouTube is great for that. My YouTube has been 99% VODs of late. I have some fun projects that have been backburnered because of the RV for a long time that can finally get into motion. I have some fun stuff planned, RE bread in particular. But I won't spoil any more about that because those will take me a while. Let's see what else. While I'm off topic of the book here, I believe we have one more thing to talk about, and that is Codex. You see that logo above my head, Codex, uh, and the Twitch team I'm on, Codex, underneath me here. I think it's always underneath me. Twitch is usually pretty consistent about having things beneath the video feed. I digress. Codex is a group of reading streamers. They have a Discord of their own. They're all very like, if you like paper cuts in any way, shape, or form, you will like a broad majority of the rest of Codex. For example, we have our mod extraordinary Gariki, who reads a lot of like fairy tales and folk tales and that kind of thing. We've got Jevons, who recently did the Hardy Boys, did Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World pretty recently. ranges pretty broadly around the public domain. Um, who else? There's one other person. R&L Quendy every now and again uh, pops up doing some visual novel stuff, which, as long-term listeners know, visual novels are near and dear to my heart. So, always happy to see that kind of thing, visual novels and interactive fiction. But at large, that's the Codex. Hopefully, eventually, we will have book clubs return from the war. I need to actually sit down and pick some simple solo tabletop RPGs that I can pitch as like uh, writing workshops, because that's another thing that the Codex. Several people in the Codex have considered expanding a little bit to work on writing as well as reading, and I think that's fun. But I digress. That's Codex in a nutshell. They're good people. They all read like me. Um, I think that's everything. I promoted the podcast. I promoted the Discord. I promoted the YouTube. I promoted Codex. I guess I have TikTok. I don't really like TikTok. Do I have a command for TikTok? Like, if you like short form video for some reason, I don't even have a command for it in chat because I shouldn't. If you like short form video, if you like me sounding like I've been sentence mixed into the world's smallest 15-second box, um, I guess it's the same username as everything else. In the sense that it's Glacier Nestor. It's just a question of whether it allows underscores, and TikTok didn't allow underscores, fun fact. But I digress. I'm many places across the internet. If you dig, you'll find me at this point. Anyway, the strawberry fruits that were growing in bunches. Dean, that's where we were. The seeds will be warm and moist in a sealed environment like that. They'll be encouraged to grow quickly. When one sprouts, we remove them and plant them somewhere they'll have room to grow larger. But we've got something different for you, Freya said brightly, and presented Dana with a metal pot the size of a coffee cup, with Dana's name and the date painted artistically on the side. Dean pushed the pot into her hands. You told me about that weed growing through the concrete back in town, he said kindly, and it was the gentlest tone of voice he'd ever had with her. This one's yours. A dandelion? Nope. Dean grinned. Dana wasn't sure what to do with the pot. It was illegal, but it was the first thing she'd be trusted with. For some reason, that brought her mind back to the radio. She kept it unplugged, but she didn't dare discard it. The blast at the scrapyard had shown this world could become fatal at any time, just like the city before it. The radio was her safety net. She and Morris had been working together for half an hour or so when Freya leaned out her driver's side window. Hey, Doc, there's a med alert on the map. Somebody needs a medic. Morris quickly jumped up to investigate, and Freya stepped off her rig to give him privacy. She went over to Dean and Dana. Dean, that spot on the map that lit up, it's the Hales Freehold. Rona. Well, she was getting close last time we heard. Sure enough, Morris went out to join them, speaking swiftly. Rona Hale went into labor about half an hour ago. She's calling for a midwife. When she heard I was last seen with you guys, she asked specifically for me to come and help her deliver. I'll need an assist. It should be Dana, Freya said immediately, and Dean nodded. Me? You have to be ready in 10 minutes, Morris said crisply. And the weather stations we've got reporting says that the heat's going to be vicious. If we don't make it before mid-morning, we might not make it. I'll have your bike charged, Dean promised. Get your bag. Dana felt bamboozled again. Why me? There are at least 3 things about this that make no sense. Yeah, but it's not like you're not going to go. Just you and the doc all alone, away from us. Her brother was watching her with that little smirk, and she scowled at him. You keep smirking at me, I'm gonna deck you. And it's not that. Who invites a girl to watch someone go through labor as a first date? Morris returned from his tent with his doctor bag. Freya and Morris had a quick conference, and Dana was surprised to see Freya look more worried than anything else. Dean explained quickly. Freya knows Marco, the little family you're on your way to meet. She knows the oldest son. If it goes well, he'll be coming to join us as Freya's apprentice. That's why I'm going? To see if his family needs him more than we do. Dean nodded, and there wasn't a trace of humor in his face now. Good luck. Dana felt like there was a factor she was missing, but she didn't comment on as Dana felt like there was a factor she was missing, but she didn't comment on it as Morris's motorcycle took off from the dust. The cycle was a lot like Freya's, probably printed from the same design. There was a narrow black storage unit on the back, currently resting against her tailbone. It looked like a 3D printed version of a classic black doctor's bag. As with Freya, she rode lightly on the back, arms around Morris. The trip took a few hours, but the motorcycle was electric and rode almost silently, so they could talk on the ride. Morris told her all about the life of a doctor out past the red line. Home visits used to be how doctors worked all over the world. You went to the patients, not the other way around. It was actually better that way. If a patient needed quarantine or they lacked mobility, it was safer for them. Medicine is the most tightly regulated claimed idea in the city. The clinics are under armed guard. I heard about a woman who took a recording app into a doctor's office with her. She asked a bunch of medical advice on behalf of half a dozen women. Got charged with stealing privileged intellectual property. She got thrown in the work farms for infringement. Morris sighed, mostly to himself. It's one part of being a doctor that goes against training completely, turning patients away. He handed back his device. See if the beacon's in range. Dana turned the device on, checking. The correct function was already running. I got a blip, she shouted over the wind. It's about 10 degrees left. Morris nodded. We'll have to go over the dust dunes for a while. Hang on. The sun came out and hit them as they went off-road. The sunlight was like a physical attack, heat drilling into Dana, and she found herself leaning into the wind as Morris drove them on. They followed the beacon for almost 20 minutes before she saw where it was coming from. The signal was steady enough that it was in a good spot, probably elevated and in the open, but there was no sign of any structures or, for that matter, anything man-made at all. But when they got closer, they could make out a tether. A thin, flexible cable running up almost 30 feet, held aloft by a small drone straining under the weight, transmitting the beacon. As Morris pulled the bike in close, the drone dropped back down, quickly. They were met by Marco, who led them to a shaded entrance, hidden beneath a huge solar panel. Even pre-dawn, the heat was like a flamethrower, and Dana let out a sweet sigh of relief as they came underground. The stairs went down only a few meters, but the difference, it was immense. Marco unwrapped his sun protection, revealing a boy of about 10 years old, with sun-tanned skin, face painted in colored patterns, and one arm missing at the elbow. The underground home had several rooms connected by tunnels. Dana heard Marco close the hatch behind them and felt a twinge from her long-suppressed claustrophobia. Marco noticed her starting to breathe faster and sent a look to the doctor. My mom's in the bedroom. Contractions are now 8 minutes apart. She's breathing normally. Morris smiled. Marco, you'd make a fine nurse. He quickly made his way toward the patient. Why don't you show Dana the farm? Dana, who was a half-step behind Morris, froze when she heard that. I thought I was here to help with... I'll call if I need you. Marco held out his good hand. Come on, City Slicker. I doubt you've seen this before. The underground dwelling wasn't nearly as cramped. Woo. The underground dwelling wasn't nearly as cramped as Dana thought it would be. The ground here was solid rock. There was no darkness, with what looked like cables made of light running through every room. The cables are fiber optics. I've people scrounging the stuff from every scrapyard and lost town they can find. Time was, these cables ran power and information to homes and towers. Now they just carry sunlight directly underground to us. Amazing. But why am I here? She thought. Below the ground, the rooms remained at a constant, comfortable temperature. The rock chambers were hand-carved, and she saw the tools here and there, printed like the tools back at the junkyard, with salvaged drill bits. Did you carve all this out? Me, Dad, and Mom, too. Dad's back on the coast now, working on a project. He couldn't get back in time, but we've been able to take care of ourselves. He gestured to the next chamber. Thanks to this, anyway. The door was watertight, and she realized why when she stepped in. The underground farm was very much like the one at Miller's, full of colored lights and misting water, only this was a refitted room. There was another condenser, far more heavy duty than the one she'd assembled. The fiber optics ran here too, but with more LED lights, adding different colors to the spectrum. The chamber was full of stacked plastic frames, row after row after row of edibles growing. After a lifetime of having to strain to see green plants in distant towers, Dana now had real grass underfoot. She could feel the thin drains beneath that, collecting the runoff, ready to cycle it back into the air, feeding the exposed roots and nourishing the plants. Dana couldn't help but reach her arms out. The chamber was wide enough that she could easily stretch. With green underfoot, the smell of fresh earth, and actual sunlight, if indirectly cast, well, her claustrophobia was forgotten in this little farmland. With her eyes closed, she could faintly make out the sound of a pained cry coming from upstairs. She opened her eyes and saw that Marco was very aware of it too. "The doctor's with her," she assured him awkwardly. "It'll be fine." "If they were sure of that, you wouldn't be here," Marco said roughly, more cynical than most 10-year-olds. "To be honest, I'm not..." Dana shut herself up real quick. There was no good reason to tell a 10-year-old that the only other adult around would be no help to the doctor if his mom was in trouble. She'd been told that she was there to help with the delivery, but she hadn't even seen the woman in question. Is it possible Morris just wanted to spend some time with me after all? "You're here for me," Marco said, as though he could read her mind. When he saw she didn't understand, he gestured at his disabled limb. "I was born this way. I don't know if it was a spill or a chem plant exploded, but I do know I was born this way because my mom was in an unhealthy place for pregnancy before she left the city." Dana swiftly understood. "Oh." Marco nodded. "You're here because if my baby brother doesn't make it, they want someone to keep the 10-year-old away. Like I don't know what the problem is every time I look in the mirror." He waved his half arm angrily to make the point. Dana let out a breath. "Right. Look, I don't have kids. Some of my best friends do, and I can tell you, it's not just what the kids can handle, it's also what the parents can bring themselves to show you. If your mom is scared of something bad happening, it's best to let them be scared in private. Grown-ups like to be brave around kids. They like to pretend kids aren't really aware of what's going on." Dana could see the worry. The kid wanted to be an apprentice, and he was going to find out if that had happened or not sometime today, alone with this stranger, to say nothing of what would happen to his family. "Marco, you're a very smart, very kind young man, and I believe that if you're putting your family over yourself and your life on hold for the love of your mom, then whatever my brother has to teach you, you know the more important part already." They were left to their own devices for another few hours. Dana kept returning to the farm. She'd been eating real food since she left the city, and this room, it was an oasis of life hidden safely underground. Dana noticed something painted on the stone wall of the farm. It was a mural of an old woman in a red cloak, arms open wide. Painted over her in a calligraphic, in a cal, cal, yeah, calligraphic. Painted over her in a calligraphic design were three words: Suchan of Arcadia. Dana didn't give the image much thought, as it wasn't the only mural painted in the place. She looked around the underground home again, shaking her head in amazement. "I gotta say, I'm impressed. I mean, you're isolated, but that's really the only flaw." "My family's lived in this place for 3 generations now. My great-grandfather was one of the original wheelers. Back then we hadn't figured the way to survive, not completely. Some of the original team, they thought the way to survive was to dig in and be self-sufficient. Up above, the problem is climate. Heat gets into the mid-50s every summer, minus teens every winter. Well, 12 feet deep, we're pretty immune, even the farm." "My friend has an aero farm in her rig. It's a box with colored lights and stacks of plants with exposed roots. Yeah, low water usage. Our little home here was originally meant as a farming station, so that anyone passing by would be able to stop and restock their food supply. Now we make cable. And metal cable, power cable, communications. I told you, Mom and I have more people bringing in fiber optic than what we know what to do with. You get a lot of scrap metal and you melt it down. Dana blinked. Sorry, but you can do that without a factory? We are the factory. I told you, 3 generations living here. Wheelers keep us supplied, so we keep 'em equipped. Dana looked around and realized there was no garage. You aren't wheelers. Wheelers are what the mobile ones call themselves. My mom's a freeholder. I'm still too young to be either. How many places like this? How many places like this are there? She wondered and gave herself a quick mental slap. Crawley would lock her up to get an answer to that question, so she didn't want to know. Enough. You do go a little stir crazy, though. I've been wanting to be out at the projects for ages, but my dad said I wasn't old enough to be an apprentice until 10. Your father? Dana's ears pricked up. Do I ask about him or not? Aloud, she coached her words carefully. Marco, I know you want to be out there, seeing more of the world, but you have to know, even if everything turns out fine, it may not happen. Your mom will still need all the help she can get. He was about to answer when the door swung open and Morris came in. There you are. He sighed out, looking tired and pleased. Marco, you have a baby brother, and he's perfect. Marco was so relieved when he knew his family was okay that he went into full-speed action. Dana and Morris were fed a large feast and offered anything from the little household as payment. Morris had taken a data card with the printed designs for one of the comm drones in trade. Dana hadn't accepted anything. She'd been out of the city for almost 2 months, but still felt a little leery of what seemed like pirate production, to her thinking. And I can't take it back with me. The thought unsettled her as she and Morris rode back the way they came on his cycle. Dana leaned closer to shout over the wind. What happened to Marco's father? There are plenty of projects. Morris nodded, weaving through the dunes toward the old road. Not everyone lives in rigs like your brother. Some of the things they do take a lot longer, and people stay with them. That's where the real work is. The real work? Dana repeated. The way he said it was reverent. It was like he was talking about a holy cause of some kind. They came out from the dunes into full sunlight on the cracked concrete highways, and Dana felt all thought leave her head with a gasp. Ugh! Oh, that sun's got a bite to it today, Morris agreed. The heat was like an oven, and Dana could feel her skin prickling even through the sun protection she was wearing. Once they hit the open road, it got worse. Dana had seen the polished rooftop of her brother's rig, reflecting some of the heat away. I never appreciated how hot the paving can get. Not like this in your region? Morris called back to her, trying to speed up enough to give them a breeze. Thought you were all concrete there. Yeah, but it's not like we're ever outside. When the temperature got real high, they'd lock down the city. We'd have to pay off the temperature control fees. Morris's device, mounted as a dashboard for the printed motorbike, suddenly started beeping loudly. He checked it. Oh boy, we gotta find cover, he called back to her. Heat death warning. Looks like it's about to get a whole lot hotter. Dana was suddenly aware of how isolated they were, halfway between the cool underground home of Marco and the protected rig of her brother. Can we make it back? Don't have to. There's a way station we can wait it out in. We're about 4 miles away. Hang on, this won't be comfy. And he turned the bike off-road again. The heat was suffocating enough that she was starting to panic. The air was so overfilled with heat, it felt like the air couldn't hold any more of it. She felt like she was underwater, trying to suck in oxygen through a straw. The sweat was pouring off her, her heart was hammering, trying to keep up, trying to shed enough heat to keep her alive. She could feel the hard plastic frame of the motorcycle softening under her, and suddenly felt a moment of panic. The heat was going to be fatal if it overheated the battery or melted the 3D printed structure. Morris pulled up the bike and immediately pulled the battery. Dana was going faint, her head starting to spin. She wanted to scream, but the heat was like a weight, pressing down on her. Her instinct was to tear her clothes away, writhe out from under the invisible hand that was strangling her. The heat waves were so dense, the sunlight so intense, she was almost blinded, but she saw the solar panels at ankle height. Morris pulled her to walk along them, and then bent down. The hard pan burned at her hands, baked red hot by the sun, but she felt the hatch and helped him pull it up. There was a stairwell leading below the solar panels, and steam rose as the cooler air within collided with the heat, Dana nearly falling into the hiding place. Morris pulled the hatch shut behind him and fell over, the heavy battery clattering down the stairs. Dana looked over blearily, convinced she could see steam rising from his skin. Morris turned over and threw up. Doc? Heat stroke. We gotta cool off. There'll be water in the... He was still talking, but his voice was turning to static in his ears, or static in her ears as the world spun, and she passed out. She came back to herself feeling much cooler, if still a little lightheaded. He didn't look much better, but at least he was upright, wiping her face down with a cool, wet cloth. Hey, welcome back. Dana hummed and tried to sit up, and he helped her slowly. She was lying on bare rock, with her protective clothing bundled up and laid under her head. There was equipment in the chamber, but nothing else. No furniture? Harder to make than you think. Don't try to move. Dana hummed and stayed where she was. What about you? Are you okay? He nodded and brought over a large drink bottle. Hydration's your friend right now. Dana took the bottle and began to take little sips. Her insides felt like liquid already. Where did this come from? She slurred, because she was quite certain he hadn't had it on the bike. Not yet, he told her, checking her pulse. First, get some rest. She obeyed, lying back. The stone floor was so cool down underground, and her head was still swimming. She napped and felt much better when she woke up. He was asleep, curled in a ball by the staircase. The room was an underground rectangle. She could see insulated power cables running down the stairwell into the narrow chamber. Standing close to the stairs, she could feel the air become warmer, like the heat was trying to claw its way down to them. The electrical cable led to some equipment, and Dana suddenly realized the hiding place was under an array of solar panels, including the entrance. The equipment included one of the omnipresent printers, currently making them a new bike frame. There was also a pipe that led straight up through the rock, leading down to a solidly built water tank. Dana recognized the purpose immediately. She'd made a smaller version of this at the lavender fields. The solar panels above were providing powered water condensers. The depth protected them from the heat, and the water would slowly trickle in, filling this tank for anyone passing by during the heat waves. Above the staircase was a hand-painted sign, Arcadia Station 181. The monitor showed a map of the region covered in dozens of icons. The map was identical to the one her brother had been using to navigate his rig, limited to the area around this spot. Huh, I didn't see any of this on my brother's map. That's how they do things, Morris commented behind her, sitting up. They've got their resources scattered. They can create water in many places. Water means food. The world's littered with spots for shelter, and they never need to keep them long. Decentralized everything. If one gets wiped out by heat, another by storm, another by greed, there's at least two more to fall back on. He tossed her another water bottle. Keep drinking. The reservoir was full when we got here. Might as well let the condenser do something useful after we leave. Dana drank gratefully. Another few minutes and I'd have died out there. Well, we both would have. My brother tells me it was the breaking point for the old days. Heat wave that just didn't stop and the power grid overloaded. Whole cities of people cooking like we did. Heat waves in this part of the world. Other countries had cold snaps and polar vortexes that buried whole cities in ice. The city in this region barely survived a storm front that wouldn't end. There was nobody left to fix it afterwards. It wasn't a global cataclysm. It was a dozen that kept the world from getting up again. Dana shivered in a way that had nothing to do with the cooler air. I helped my brother plant some fields of lavender plants. They wouldn't have survived the heat wave, would they? Under a thin solar print shelter? Probably not, but that's why they plant everywhere they can. Morris checked the display. Still way too hot out there. We might be here till sundown. Rona and Marco weren't kidding about the heat. I feel like I'm gonna puke. That'll fade as soon as your body returns to a safe temperature. I think I should have taken Rona up on her offer to stay until next nightfall. Oh, it wouldn't have been polite.
I doubt they would have minded too much, but taking too much time in another person's space is huge taboo in the city. We never have enough room to be comfortable. You get your own space, or at least have the right to keep it yours. Yeah, that's what I told Banner when I first saw his rig. He insisted on giving me a lift, and he was right. I'd have died before I made it anywhere on foot. Dana nearly passed out again. You're from. You're from my city? You lived there? More than 2 years ago. The medical training was something I already had. Everything else I picked up on the way. They rested, waiting for the sun to set and the air above to cool. Dana found she liked talking to him. He was from the same city as her, and they actually had familiar things to talk about. My family opposed my becoming a doctor, Morris said with an air of having told the story a million times before. They thought I should go into politics. In the 900 block, you either become a magistrate or a politician. I had no stomach for either. You lived in the 900 block? I took the monorail to work down to the 500s. There's this spot between the towers where you can look down the length of the main thoroughfare and see the 900s. That dome on top, so full of green and color, you feel like it's a fireworks show. The Dome Gardens. I've only been there a few times. Not so much the color as it is the smell. You don't even notice it when it's gone, but when you're surrounded by trees and flowers, you can just breathe life in. You're from the city, and so is Rona. Dana shook her head again. How did I not notice? So many people out here came from town. We're all told there's nothing left out here. Morris nodded. We all know someone who knows someone. Part of the medical training, I had to learn a bit about demographics. Living in the 900s, I could get a look at all the records. There's a huge discrepancy between what the census shows and what the hospital records show. So many people who were born never get to school. So many people who should be in elderly care never show up, and a lot of them are listed as alive only because they were never recorded at a mortuary. At every stage of life, a good number of the city goes AWOL. They aren't being rounded up and marched into the shredders. They gotta be going somewhere. It's not some romantic wish for the open road, Morris. Dana let out a breath between her teeth. I had to choose between a shelter or the Wheelers when the fees ate me up. I had made it to them safely because of my brother. How many didn't make it that far because the sun decided to go sudden death on them? No way to know for sure, but I found out about the Wheelers from my patients who said they couldn't afford to stay in the city and had to roll the dice. Just like us, you know. My family cut me off when I went into medicine. Dad said he'd allow it if I became the best doctor ever. He wanted something he could brag about when he shifted from law to politics. He offered to fund my tuition if I scored more than 95. I scored a 91, and, well, that was that. That's callous. That's a contract, Morris countered, looking long used to it. My father's used to the world being as he wants it. When something doesn't stick to the plan, it isn't part of his world for long. Dana found herself holding his hand with a smile. You're a doctor. Everyone who calls you is having something unplanned happen to them, then you make it better. Morris was smiling back, seeming a little lighter. He squeezed her hand. I have to confess, I wish we could have met back in the city. I think that we would have been friends. The two of them sat for a while, letting that thought linger, when he suddenly remembered something and reached into his many pockets. Oh, I'd almost forgotten. He pulled out a small device. While we're here, I can charge this up. Dana peered at Dana peered at it as he plugged it in. Is that a recorder? She was awed. Such devices were for making records of things. When you had to pay all the fees for the inevitable infringements you made by recording other people, added up to quite the rich man's toy. Used it for taking patient notes. Since coming out here, I've found a whole other use for it. The device lit up as power flowed into it from up above, and he keyed the controls. All of a sudden, their little hiding place was filled with music. Dana felt her heart give a sudden thud. She hadn't heard music in years. The laws on music went all the way back to the days when infringements were called copyright laws. Ever since, creative works were the most complicated license to sort out. In the 500s, Dana had no hope of affording such an indulgence. She sat up, almost at attention. Morris saw her interest and turned the volume up a little. It's a recording made by a traveling group of wheelers. Some make their living by providing food or seeds, spare parts. These guys scrounge or make instruments and travel to projects to perform. They don't mind you recording them? They encourage it. Their view is obscurity's worse than piracy. The more people hear their music, the more people come back to see more. He sat back down quietly, letting her listen without interruption. Dana had only heard commercial music in the city. Jingles that made consumables memorable were the only musical arrangements that were free. This was something else. It was longer, creative, playful. It was joy and color and light. She heard the singer vocalizing along with it, and Dana felt her heart start to beat in time with the rhythm. She listened, swayed, and rocked back and forth to the heavenly sound till the recording ran out, and the singer spoke. Well, that's about all we have got time for tonight, but we hope you enjoyed the show. We'll be back this way in a few months and hope to see you again. The recording stopped there, and Dana jerked with the halt as though someone pulled the rug out from under her. Wow, she breathed, feeling like she was back on solid ground for the first time in years. She suddenly became aware of him watching her. Sorry. For what? Morris murmured quietly, trying not to break the spell. Never seen anyone go into a trance like that, listening to music. I've never heard anything like it before. Thank you, Morris. Thank you for that. Everyone should have that at least once in their lives. The warm moment lasted for several moments, when he noticed the panel above. The red lights were blue. Look, after sunset, safe to go back above ground now. Dana nodded and quickly measured the water left in the reservoir, updating the numbers on the beacon. Other wheelers in the area would know that someone had taken a few liters from this hiding place. Nobody would be taken by surprise and left thirsty. Not on my account. She shook her head. Free drinking water. The bike had apparently survived under its reflective tarp, and Morris reinstalled the battery, slotting his device back into the dashboard. I'll have you home to Dean in less than 2 hours, he reported and smiled a bit. Unless you want to drive? Dana felt her heart thud in her chest. I've never actually driven one of these things before. We've had a nice evening. I think a fatality'd be a real downer. Not if you don't crash, he told her brightly and slid back to make room for her. Go for it. Look at it this way. You spent half the weekend learning new skills. What's one more? Dana took a breath and swung a leg over the motorcycle in front of him. Okay, but you better hold on really tight for your own safety. His hands went around her waist instantly. If you insist. And despite herself, she flushed hotly enough that she almost wanted to go back underground. Good. Don't let go. Dean stepped down from the rig as the motorcycle pulled up. If he was surprised to find her at the controls, he didn't show it. Hey, Doc, gotta turn out. A boy, healthy. Dean turned back to the rig. Freya? I heard you. Freya stepped down from the rig. I'll head up there in a week or two. Let him get a handle on the new arrival. She sent a look to Dana. You met Marco then, my new apprentice? I have, Dana nodded. He's no nonsense. She turned back to her brother. Come to think of it, how come you don't have an 8-year-old of your own around to learn deep wheeler life wisdom? Dean grinned at this. I do. You. I knew it was a mistake as soon as I said it. Morris smirked as he plugged in a fresh cell to his motorcycle, ready to leave. Well, Dana, it was quite a night. He gave her a quick, friendly hug. I was glad to spend it with you. Maybe next time we hold up somewhere a little more comfortable? I'll bring strawberries, you bring drinks? Count on it, Morris agreed as he climbed back on his motorbike. Hopefully sometime soon. He gunned the motor before she could respond and took off back the way they came. It took Dana a moment to notice she was watching after him. I know that look, Dean said from behind her. I don't know what you're talking about. Dana didn't look him in the eye as she quickly turned away and went to the rig. I've seen that look before, champ. You spent a few moments picturing yourself in the Good Doctor when you're old and gray watching a sunset somewhere. I did not, Dana lied. But I think he'd be really handsome when he gets gray. Hey, Dean, I just got a weather alert, Freya called to them over the comm as they drove. Temperature's going to be over 55 Celsius tomorrow. Dean hit the comm on his device. That's risking heat death. Can we make it to Xanadu? It'll be tight. What is Xanadu exactly? Dana asked. She'd heard the word spoken back and forth now and then among her classes at the scrapyard. It's already dark and we're hauling a heavy cargo trailer. If you push up the revs all night, we could be stuck if we're out in the open during that kind of heat. I know. We'll get there. Once we do, power won't be an issue. The sky was starting to get light to the east, and the air was already stifling, even in the rig. The light grew, and she started to see more details. Dean was driving them directly toward a cliffside. She could see no ramp to climb it, and it extended far enough that they'd have to turn widely to go around. But Dean clearly had a fixed point in mind, because he wasn't the only one. Dana wondered where all the different vehicles were going when they left the scrapyard. Apparently, they were all taking different routes to get to this point. Dana could see dozens of them in either direction alongside them. Dozens more already parked at the base of the cliff. The dust had piled more than 30 feet high around the rock wall, and Dean was driving to meet the formation of parked rigs. He tapped at his device, currently serving as the dashboard of his rig, and apparently received a response, directing him to a specific parking spot. Freya pulled up into position beside him. Dean plucked his device off the dashboard and jumped up. We gotta hurry. Dana stepped down from the rig, looking around. The pattern was clear, seen from this angle. A semicircle of vehicles, all arrayed in curved rows around the cliffside. What is this? Why park in this layout? Why is she seeing this? Banner yelled, storming up from the row of Wheeler vehicles in front of them. We told you to keep her blindfolded all the way in. She's my sister. I trust her. Dean snapped back defiantly. Besides, isn't this the point of what I'm trying to do? The way statics are wired up, she's still half expecting this to be the main course at dinner time. She knows the color of the rock in that cliff, the general area, and which direction the sun's coming up from. For a smart person, that'd be enough to find us again. She's not gonna tell anyone, and even if she was dirty, you think they don't know about Xanadu? We've been gathering here for quite a while now, you know. It's not like we can hide the rigs when we do this. We got another 8 minutes until dawn. We gotta get the panels unhooked. He climbed up the side of his van. Dana, give me a hand here, please. Dana never took her eyes off Banner as she climbed up to join him. Seeing all the vehicles laid out around her in rows, she suddenly noticed something uniform about them, as the solar collectors were all uncoupled from the rooftops. Mirrors. The solar panels on your van are covering mirror polish? All of them are, her brother told her. The mirrors are the single most valuable component of a wheeler's van. Solar panels are there to protect them as much as possible. Aside from collecting power, anyway. Why? Dana couldn't help but ask. What's heat but energy? He gestured up at the cliff face. So we bring our homes to Xanadu. Dana looked around the careful arrangement of the vans, now an array of raised mirrors. The sun was just starting to peek over the horizon of the cliffs above, and it hit her. What's up there? Her brother grinned, waiting for her to work it out, and she looked again. It's the solar tower. You've turned the cliffside into a solar tower? Nobody knows it? 50 degrees Celsius today, her brother nodded, sliding down to the ground. Double that, you can boil water. Boil water, you can power a turbine. More heat we send away from our homes, the more power it draws. We use that power to cool down the inside, grow our crops, recharge our vehicles. All of it off-grid? Do the Frinchers even know you're here? That's why Banner's so worried about you seeing it. He is in charge of security. Let's get our solar panels organized. Even on the ground, they can plug in. Waste not, want not. Every watt we get here means the solar farm can give free to everybody else. Or keep charged for later. There's some ridiculously large capacitors hidden in that cliff. So the heat waves can see you through the blizzard months, too? Climate collapse giveth, climate collapse taketh away. Bring your seedlings along. Dean and Freya joined a second group making their way toward the windward dunes, and piled high enough they'd never be able to climb them in the rig. Except this group wasn't climbing anything, but rather heading to a concealed entrance. Dana was trying to look anywhere but the small doorway, and there was always something more interesting to see. The sky was now fiercely bright, and their mass of people were being driven underground by it anyway. Dana was carrying the pot Freya had given her, feeling ever so slightly stupid about carrying a cup of dirt into a concealed tunnel with 100 strangers watching.
Then she noticed others doing the same thing. No, I'm not a fish. No. One or two groups pushing huge trolleys carrying what looked like woven bamboo containers full of soil. I am not a fish. I am not a fish. I do not need to have hiccups. I am not a fish. I am not a fish. I'm not a fish. Dana let him and the other trolleys go in front of her, then shook her head slightly. They take their farms with them wherever they go. She shook it off. She had a much more immediate problem to contend with. The concealed entrance in the dune was a literal dark tunnel. She could already feel her heart speeding up. Her feet were moving slower automatically, her grip around the pot tightening. Move up, champ. Line's backing up behind you. Maybe I should stay at the rig. I don't want to go in there. Dean put his arm in hers. Hey, remember, we hide the entrance for when we're not here. It's a lot roomier than you give it credit for. Bigger than home. Home. Where she'd lived her whole life. Dana had spent a few weeks in the rig with windows enough that she never felt cramped, with open space around her and a sky that went on forever. She hadn't felt trapped since leaving the city. Nevertheless, she ducked her head as she approached the tunnel, enough that she saw something that changed. Something had changed with her plan. Dean, something's happening. Dean looked over her shoulder. It's growing, Dana. That's what's meant to happen. Dana started at the little green tendril emerging from the dirt. The only experience she had with growing things back in the city were dandelions pushing through the concrete. What's the hold up? Someone behind them called, and Dana jumped. She hadn't realized she'd stopped moving. Dean didn't push, didn't drag her in. Dana, the plant won't survive the heat out here. Dana glanced back at the apparently living thing she was holding and squared her shoulders. Just like the heat shelter. Pretend you're alone in there with Morris, she told herself. She sent one look back at the forbidding cliffside, surrounded by an array of vehicles, reflecting the dawn up to the cliffs, which were starting to glow with a stifling sun. She could see daylight creeping down the cliffs toward their level, and she retreated underground with the others. It wasn't as cramped as she expected. The entrance was narrow enough to be concealable and hid the real nature of the shelter in the dust. The walls weren't dirt at all. Something had been built and hidden here. I was expecting it to be boiling hot. It is a solar tower. Dean smirked. In the cliffs, but not here. We built these shelters in sections. They're 3D printed regolith. Same tech they used to build the lunar colonies back when they had spaceflight. Ooh, lunar colony tech gets us a footnote. 3D printed homes are already available commercially, if not commonly. Advanced models are planned to make shelters autonomously on Mars and the Moon as part of future plans for space missions. Yeah, the 3D printed houses, with the concrete like 3D printing around, have their upsides and downsides. Really, honestly, personally, I'd be interested in trying like I'd be interested in investigating whether it's worth putting like large bore conduit in there for network uh network fiber, and how much work it would be to leave room in conduits to add extra electrical wiring or HVAC, and how much you can do with passive versus active heating and cooling with that much of a mass of concrete. It's fascinating is what it is. Anyway, back to the story. With a hum of power, the climate control came on and everyone cheered, living out one of the heat death days in relative comfort. Dana was hurried along a hallway by the stream of people and peeked in doorways as she went. It was essentially a network of rooms, all of them with the same layered walls. She saw stairs going up and down and realized how much dirt and dust had piled up around the cliffs. The space was well lit and there were pipes feeding cooler air into all the rooms. The solar tower powers the colony here? The colony and the rigs. It's a charging station. In the cliff sides, a huge set of power cells. Every rig that comes through trades the used ones for charged ones. Station keeps charging constantly, even when we're not here. The three of them had to share a room, but Dana had lived in tighter quarters, even if she hated it. After so long looking out and seeing the horizon, it was almost like being back in the shelter. It is safe, right? She heard herself asking weakly. Dana, nobody's gonna hurt you in here. These are all our own people. Your people, she corrected mentally. Be easier to believe you were all honest men if you weren't so obviously in hiding. Everywhere I've seen is hidden in plain sight. Xanadu's a 3D printed community hiding underground. Hiding places aren't to keep us away from the law, sis. It's to keep us out of the weather. Those hiding places have saved your life twice. The dust storms buried us. We just built our shelters first. The interiors were basically a larger version of her brother's rig. She saw all kinds of indoor farms, 3D printers churning out components, even a few CRISPR sets churning out gene hacks. There were meat tanks culturing sides of clean meat to be served as food. Dana could see the crowded rooms naturally forming into groups, trading stories, collaborating on projects, sharing information about the wastelands. Whatever these people did when they weren't here, they were taking advantage of the chance to collaborate. Her brother eventually roped her into a card game as everyone passed daylight. Someone in the bunker had panpipes, and there was music, though Dana couldn't see where from. Dana took the opportunity to observe more of them than she'd ever seen in one place. Their clothing and grooming had no standardization like back in the city, but were all similar in style, as if everything they made individually was still cultural in their own way. There were no fights breaking out, no theft, no undercurrent of violence. Back in the shelter, the people had nothing to do but mark time and dwell on the fact they'd never get off the street. These people all had something to do, something they took very seriously, even. How are we all so unaware of this back home? Dana wondered. They stayed until sunset and went out to check the rigs. The charging was well underway, with the capacitors full to bursting. Still having flashbacks to the shelter, Dana slept in a hammock for the first time and woke to her brother shaking her foot. Come on, you should see this. Even in the hours before dawn, Dana noticed there were some people awake working on something. The printers were still churning out parts. Dana had learned that while some people would set up solar cookers to grill their food while they hid inside, others used the heat of the solar farm to soften some of the salvaged metal for shaping. We're going outside? You said heat death? During the day. Land here is plastered to hardpan and desert sand. Doesn't retain any heat. True enough, the air outside was crisp. When it hit her lungs, she gasped. Wow, I thought we were hiding from summer. You've never been in this kind of open before. Enjoy. Dana looked out over the hardpan and realized suddenly that he was right. With the cliffs behind her, she was feeling all of it. Dean led them a short way from Xanadu and switched off his lantern. Dana closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, this whole sky lit up. Stars, 1 billion stars, 1,000,000,000,000 stars. Oh my God. Dean glanced at her face. His sister suddenly looked a decade younger and softer. My first night out here, I nearly froze to death staring at them. Nobody in the city ever sees this. Even in the poorest part of town, even with 3 out of 4 street lights turned off at night, the sky never gets this dark. Dana felt her vision blur from tears, half from the cold, half from the awe. She'd been so starved of color that she wept over a dandelion, but the sky had never been so alive. In the city, you lived surrounded by windbreaks with memorials for the storms that are always in mind. There were so many stars the sky was almost daylight, 1 billion points of sparkling diamond light from horizon to horizon. So many stars. It's not black, it's blue. Yeah, the sky is blue. You've seen it during the day. Think it changed color at night? Most colors look black with the lights off. First time I've seen enough stars to add a little light, Dana said, and her voice was already taking on a dreamy quality. They stared up until Dana suddenly shuddered. Oh, cold. Weather report says it'll be fairly still tonight, though. Hang around another half hour, people start coming out to sleep under the stars, Dean promised, slinging a woven blanket around her shoulders. But I wanted you to have a moment, just for yourself.
You still keep to the city's schedule, and you never go outside to see stars. He was right. More people had come out of the hidden colony before long. One or two of them had homemade telescopes and were taking a look at the sky. They didn't set up campfires or cookouts. Dana wondered if there was anything flammable around, given the whole place was designed to reflect sunlight like a magnifying lens. But there was music playing, gentle in the night chill. All of them acoustic instruments, designed around repurposed material. Dana swayed with it a bit, but she still couldn't name any instruments. She wondered if there was anything as a... She wondered if there was any such thing as a produced product here. Maybe all the instruments sounded unique because they were made by the musician playing them. She glanced around for faces she didn't know and told herself she wasn't looking for Morris specifically. How can there be a whole town out here nobody in the city knows? I'm honestly not sure if they care. It's not like we bother much with the statics. That's why the blast has rattled our guys so much. It'd be the first deliberate attack on wheelers in, well, longer than our lifetimes. A permanent setup like Xanadu Station, wouldn't it be the obvious next target? Sure, if they cared enough to attack, if the blast was deliberate, and if they knew we were here. That's three ifs. And unlike the junkyard, this place uses nothing from the city. Scrappers only use their refuse. Xanadu uses nothing at all. Too much cost for little result. Resource management is everything in the city. Well, out here too. To them, resources are everything, so they lock it all up like a vault. To us, resources are everything, so we put them in as many baskets as possible. Dana shivered. It was a quiet life before I got here, wasn't it? You and Freya going back and forth, planting lavender some days, harvesting water and sunlight? Well, it's not changed that much. With a junkyard strike, we'll have to travel a little further out and visit a few more places. You'll be getting a full tour of the Wheeler's life. Who knows? Maybe you'll find somewhere you want to stay. Dana barked out a laugh. Unlikely. But deep down, she wasn't as sure as she used to be. Hang on, I'm going to check something real quick. Let me just bookmark this real quick. Dude, bookmark, please. Bookmarks. New. And then I'm just gonna see once how much more is left in this chapter, or if we need to call it a night here. We are in chapter 8, I think. Where are we? We're still in chapter 4. We're still in chapter 3. Wow. Yeah, we're a long way from the end of chapter 3. I was hoping to... Yeah, we're a good long way from the end of chapter 3. I think we're gonna have to pick up with Dana's unsurety, if you will, next time. Um, oh, I have a lot of thoughts about this book, and I'm gonna be writing them down, and I'm gonna be talking them over at the end of the book. But this is a really fantastic expansion on Miles Past Xanadu. I was worried, you usually worry when you go, oh, this was a short story. Oh, I hope the expansion doesn't just spin its wheels. No, this is really great, like, expansion upon, like, it's very clear that Matt Stevens here, like, had an entire, like, huge world building plan all set up, and he just couldn't fit it all into the short story. And so there's more and more character interaction that also expands on all the little world building choices. And a lot of these world building choices are, like, very blatantly, as alluded to in the foreword, very blatantly based on things that are at most a hop, skip, and a jump from things we already have. This is really, really good. I've really, really enjoyed this, gang. We'll be back next week with more of this. So definitely tune in then. We are currently on 8 Pacific is the time on Friday nights. Set a reminder
on your phone, in your calendar. Alexa, set a reminder for 8 p.m. next Friday to listen to Paper Cuts. You'll have to excuse me. That was a little rude, but you can remove it. You're smart. Um anyway, I could rattle on about how great this book has been for many, many more minutes than we have. I need to call it a night here. With that said, this has been Paper Cuts, and I hope it didn't sting.